American Comics. My Warhammer Simulator Chapter 441-460. With the bloodthirster Kabandah's embarrassing retreat, the arrogance of countless Khorne demons was severely suppressed. On the chaotic battlefield, the number of flesh hounds and bloodletters rapidly decreased, utterly sent back to the warp by the Blood Angel's bolters and chainswords. At this moment, the significantly greater number of Slaaneshi demons were, to the newly resurrected Primarch Sanguinius, essentially nothing more than clay chickens and pottery dogs. He only needed to perform a single, effortless dive-bombing run to turn swaths of Slaaneshi demons into piles of bloody wreckage, accompanied by the wails of their demise. At the same time, you carried the burning Imperial Blood Standard, as radiant and bright as a beacon, shuttling back and forth across the entire battlefield. While you wielded the Blood Reaper, hacking and slashing at the surrounding Slaaneshi demons, you also used the psychic suppression of the burning Imperial Blood Standard to restore the Blood Angels, who had fallen into the Red Thirst, to their senses. However, you quickly discovered a serious problem. That was that the psychic suppression range of the burning Imperial Blood Standard was limited, and it simply could not cover the entire battlefield. As soon as you temporarily moved away from a location, some of the Blood Angels who had regained their sanity and were still fighting would, as time went on, fall back into a state of indiscriminate, bloody slaughter. You subconsciously licked your fangs. Your gaze couldn't help but focus on the direction of the Bone Temple. It seemed that unless the source of the Red Thirst's curse was eliminated, the Blood Angels would never return to normal. Without hesitation, you propelled your armor, its shell shattered, towards Sanguinius's location on the battlefield like a bolt of blue lightning. Along the way, countless Slaaneshi demons were completely obliterated by your burning Imperial Blood Standard. A large amount of demonic blood had almost dyed your gray-white short hair crimson. You could clearly feel that each time you wielded the Blood Reaper to reap and kill, strands of Khorne's blessing continued to strengthen your body's constitution and physical strength. If you were given more time and opportunity to single-handedly eliminate all the Slaaneshi demons present, then perhaps your combat power could quickly rival a true Primarch, or even surpass Sanguinius in the end. However, you understood very deeply that all of this was a false illusion, a sugar-coated bullet thrown out by the Chaos Gods to make you fall. Once your will subconsciously relaxed its vigilance, or even gradually became addicted to pursuing power itself, then even if the Emperor's blood, which resisted corruption, flowed within you, it would surely be of no avail. Soon after, you, carrying the burning Imperial Blood Standard, successfully cut through most of the battlefield and found Sanguinius, who was frantically slaughtering Slaaneshi demons. You succinctly explained your discovery and plan to him. Thus, with Primarch Sanguinius leading the way, and you carrying the burning Imperial Blood Standard as a rallying point. Across the battlefield, large numbers of Blood Angels who were still sane or on the verge of succumbing to the Red Thirst began to gather towards your direction. Subsequently, the two of you, Primarchs, joined forces and led the Blood Angels in launching continuous assaults towards the location of the Bone Temple. The last remaining Keeper of Secrets, Karioth, hiding inside, also seemed to have noticed your movements. It quickly used psychic witchcraft to command the Slaaneshi demons on the battlefield, ordering them to abandon all the Blood Angels who had fallen into the Red Thirst and instead launch an encirclement attack on your team's rear. Just at this moment, while wielding the burning Imperial Blood Standard and the Blood Reaper to slaughter Slaaneshi demons, and trying to open up a path forward for the Blood Angels behind you, you inadvertently saw several Astartes wearing gray-white power armor, their ceramite shells covered with litanies and prayers. Looking at all 20 Astartes legions, only Lorgar's Wordbearer's Legion, the traitor Primarch, always liked to do this. Wordbearers, traitors, die. You subconsciously let out a roar that resounded all around. Without hesitation, you propelled your armor, its shell broken, and launched a ferocious charge towards the Wordbearers at the entrance of the Bone Temple at a speed far faster than before. Boom, boom, boom. In an instant, the violent roar from the bolters repeatedly echoed in your ears. The ceramite hand holding the Blood Reaper quickly rose. You actually used a reaction speed that even ordinary Astartes would find difficult to catch, using the Blood Reaper to forcibly split open one bolter round after another that was coming straight at you. Only a very few bolter rounds struck your heavy shoulder armor, but even then, they only shattered the outermost layer of ceramite. Immediately afterwards, you quickly moved your mag-locked boots, and your whole person, like a crazy bull, rammed more than a dozen demonettes blocking your path into broken pieces of flesh and blood. Your whole body was wrapped in a bloody storm formed from demonic blood, and you wielded the Blood Reaper and pounced fiercely at the word-bearer traitors who didn't have time to retreat and evade. In just one face-to-face encounter, several word-bearer traitors, including their power armor, were rapidly hacked into several incomplete corpses by the green light-entwined Blood Reaper. At the same time, Primarch Sanguinius, with his wings spread wide, had already flown past the entrance of the Bone Temple, swept past the huge staircase paved with a large number of human bones and demonic flesh, and forcibly charged into the interior space of the Bone Temple. Accompanied by the sound of colored glass and building rubble shattering everywhere. Countless Slaaneshi demons couldn't even withstand a casual blow from him, and were completely turned into a bloody paste that filled the sky. This is too unfair to me. That detestable Kabanda is also an arrogant waste, he can't even deal with two Primarchs. Just at this moment, a Slaaneshi greater demon with a head shaped like a horned goat, its humanoid face seemingly revealing endless seductive charm. Its chest covered with golden ornaments and full of several pairs of female organs, and its tall body with bulging purple muscles, possessing both a pair of slender blades and slender arms, slowly stepped out of the shadows. And this was one of the schemers behind the Cygnus Prime trap, the Keeper of Secrets, the Slaaneshi greater demon, Capricious Carioth. Swish! Accompanied by a gust of wind that shook the surroundings, Sanguinius, whose pure white wings suddenly retracted, landed heavily. Wearing golden power armor, his expression was icy as he stared at one of the culprits in front of him, and with the spear of Telesto tightly gripped in one hand, he was about to throw it at the opponent. Sanguinius, don't you want to save your sons? As long as you are willing to follow chaos, dedicate yourself to. At this moment, the Slaaneshi greater demon Carioth, with a stern expression on its face, quickly stepped forward, and as it suddenly raised a pair of slender blades. Above the very dilapidated ceiling of the Bone Temple, a dark mechanical device, incredibly huge in size and cast from a mixture of brass and crystal, crashed down. Targas was once the former captain of the 111th Company of the Blood Angels Legion. He had already fallen in a brutal battle during the Great Crusade. After the Blood Angels Legion successfully conquered that planet, the Battle Brothers named it Murderstar in his memory. However, at this moment, a broken body with only half a head and fragmented limbs remaining, but still able to emit painful wails from its mouth, this living corpse was clearly presented before the Primarch Sanguinius. He immediately and keenly noticed that wisps of light red aura, repeatedly extracted by black mechanical devices, were almost constantly dissipating from the pitiful scion's remains to the outside world, and, like maggots in bone, were constantly drifting towards and gathering around the fighting Blood Angels. And this was precisely a vile gift that the Word-Bearer traitors, in conjunction with the Chaos Demons, had sent to the Blood Angels Legion and the Primarch Sanguinius. The Chaos Warp construct before him, named Fury of Fire, was created by the Dark Apostle Erebus. Using Captain Targas's half-dead, broken husk as a power source, supplemented by the dark sorcery of chaos, it ultimately succeeded in triggering the genetic flaw within the Blood Angels. However, the true purpose of the Chaos Gods was to make Primarch Sanguinius, out of excessive concern for his sons, fall into their clutches and become their plaything and pawn. Demon! What have you done to him? Instantly, Sanguinius, his pure white wings once again angrily unfurled, charged towards the Slaaneshi greater demon carrying an uncontrollable and terrifying rage. He didn't even wait for the other party to finish uttering words of temptation. The blade, already stained crimson from slaying countless demons, was thrust directly into the Slaaneshi greater demon's chest. Just then, you, wielding a blood-soaked scythe wreathed in green light in your palm and bearing the burning Imperial Blood Standard on your shoulder, led a portion of the Blood Angels to successfully break into the interior of the Bone Temple. You immediately saw Sanguinius engaged in a one-sided assault against the Slaneshi Greater Demon. Then, you instantly noticed the massive mechanical device slowly descending from the ceiling above. Without hesitation, you ordered the Blood Angels behind you to raise the bolters in their hands and immediately launch a destructive attack against the source of the curse within reach. You also drew the Melt-a-Heart from your waist and fiercely pulled the trigger. No, Angels of Baal, and you, a wolf cub who shouldn't be here. You have ruined this carefully crafted surprise. At this moment, facing Sanguinius's attack, the Slaneshi Greater Demon, utterly unable to retaliate and pinned to the walls of the Bone Temple by the Spear of Bitter Loss, struggled repeatedly. The Slaneshi Greater Demon Curse, only able to flail its already severed limbs, suddenly unleashed a roar of anger that reverberated throughout the surroundings. Sanguinius, do you think this is the end? Unless you are willing to follow in the footsteps of your brother Horus and stand on the side of the victors. Otherwise, your sons will pay an unbearable and terrible price. Hearing the Slaneshi Greater Demon's words, the expressionless Sanguinius paused slightly with the crimson-stained blade he had just raised. In that instant, when the Primarch hesitated slightly, concerned about the future of his sons, you abruptly propelled your shell-shattered power armor forward. The burning Imperial Blood Standard, carried on your shoulder, was aimed like a lance at the Slaneshi Greater Demon Curse's enormous body. Damn wolf cub, sooner or later, I will see you kneeling before my master, weeping tears of despair. Seeing that the temptation of Sanguinius had produced the necessary effect, the twisted face of the Slaneshi Greater Demon Curse, which had just revealed a hint of sinister smile, instantly stiffened. Ah! Accompanied by a miserable scream, the burning Imperial Blood Standard pierced straight through the Slaneshi Greater Demon's naked chest and into the depths of the wall. The Slaneshi Greater Demon Curse's massive body was instantly enveloped by extremely terrifying warp flames and quickly burned into scattered ashes. Brother, believe me, don't believe even a single character of the Chaos Demon's promises. After confirming that the Slaneshi Greater Demon had finally disappeared, you casually pulled out the burning Imperial Blood Standard, its warp flames now much weaker, and, propelling your power armor, turned to look at the stern-faced Primarch Sanguinius, speaking to him with great solemnity. Sanguinius, slowly nodding, did not express any dissatisfaction with your act of slaying. Rumble. Just then, the massive mechanical device, repeatedly bombarded by the Blood Angels, began to teeter and finally crashed heavily onto the floor of the temple. Chi. A large number of chaotic warp fluctuations instantly swept over the Blood Angels located in the nearby area. One of the Blood Angels, named Melos because he was too close to the crashing dark mechanical device, was inadvertently drawn into the device's interior by the uncontrolled warp energy and completely merged with Captain Targus's remains. The next moment, before Sanguinius, his pure white wings suddenly unfurled, could fly forward to provide rescue. A blood-red angel with an indistinct form, burning and seething like flames, slowly appeared within the range of everyone's vision, accompanied by terrifying warp fluctuations. And every Astartes who witnessed the birth of the blood-red angel, even if they were within the warp energy suppression range of the burning Imperial Blood Standard, instantly and uncontrollably entered a state of bloodlust. Don't look at it. Turn around. Turn around. You subconsciously widened your eyes and gasped. Without hesitation, you carried the burning Imperial Blood Standard and propelled your power armor forward. However, just as you thought the blood-red angel was about to erupt into another fierce conflict with Primarch Sanguinius, you seemed to see the formless blood-red angel slightly shake what seemed to be its head in the direction of Sanguinius. Rumble. Immediately afterward, a terrifying warp energy fluctuation, almost boiling, erupted from the other party's body like a suddenly rising, violent hurricane. At this moment, not only did Sanguinius, pure white wings shielding him, rapidly retreat backward, but even you, who were charging forward, were violently blown back by the terrifying warp energy fluctuation. The surrounding Blood Angels were completely suppressed on the ground, unable to move even a finger. In an instant, the ceiling of the entire Bone Temple, along with most of the building's structure, was violently blasted open, scattering haphazardly in all directions. And after a warp rift quietly emerged, the formless blood-red angel rapidly grew a pair of enormous blood-red light wings and, without hesitation, spread its wings and flew into the mysterious and treacherous depths of the warp. You, driving a power armor with a dilapidated shell, slowly propped yourself up from under a pile of rubble. Then, after catching your breath for a few moments, you immediately saw the Primarch standing tall on the ruins of the cathedral. At this moment, a deep, unyielding sorrow seemed to flow from Saint Celestine's handsome face, which was far beyond human imagination. He seemed to be mourning the blood angels who had unfortunately died in the entire battle, or simply mourning the ultimate fate that could not be changed. You took a deep breath of the foul air, but you did not step forward to disturb him. At this moment, the chaotic fighting on the entire battlefield was coming to an end, but it was still not completely over. It's just that with the dissipation of the Slaanesh great demon carries, the remaining Slaanesh demons have become rootless and can't make any waves. You clenched the burning Imperial Blood banner and the scythe of blood in your palm, and quickly led the remaining Blood Angels to launch a strangulation operation against the Slaanesh demons. At the same time, you took this opportunity to completely awaken those Blood Angels who were still in a state of bloodlust using the burning Imperial Blood banner. When the last Slaanesh succubus was personally beheaded by you, carrying the banner with the extinguished psychic flames on your shoulder armor, subconsciously breathed a sigh of relief. You couldn't help but look up, the chaotic sky above gradually returning to normal. A streak of blood-red sunset, like a sharp sword, pierced through the heavy clouds and scattered across the cruel battlefield covered with corpses. The Cygnus campaign of the Blood Angels Legion has completely come to an end. Soon after, accompanied by repeated communication calls from the Legion's ground forces. Sorka-class Stormbird transports from the naval fleet or the flagship Red Terror continuously descended towards the ground. A large number of mortal Navy personnel rushing out of the hatch assisted the Astartes apothecaries in digging up the gene seeds of their fallen brothers on the spot, and quickly collected weapons, equipment, and fragmented corpses. Many Blood Angels who were still alive also received the necessary treatment and were immediately transported into the interior of the transport aircraft. At this moment, you, standing on a ruined building and looking into the distance, casually threw the broken Imperial Blood banner to a Blood Angel beside you. The Astartes, who was also very handsome after taking off his helmet, carefully took the Imperial Blood battle banner, and then respectfully handed you a pot of clean fresh water. You nodded at him with a smile on your lips. While taking small sips, gargling and swallowing the fresh water, you drove the power armor to jump off the ruins and walked towards the direction where the Primarch was. You can only say that Primarch Sanguinius is indeed the true soul and backbone of the Blood Angels Legion. Now, he is inspecting the transportation of all the wounded, and from time to time he bends down to comfort those sons who may need to enter the dreadnought due to serious injuries. Sanguinius, I think we have plenty of time to talk now. You said to the Primarch in a low voice. Your gaze crossed the air and stared at Sanguinius's pair of huge, pure white wings. You instantly raised your hand to stop the Blood Angels around you who were planning to kneel to you on one knee. I'm a humble person, I don't like people kneeling to me, especially when I'm still alive. Your teasing words made the Blood Angels look at each other, not knowing how to respond for a moment. At this moment, Sanguinius, wearing golden power armor, slowly got up from beside the wounded. He waved his palm gently at the crowd around him with a gentle expression. So, including the Terminator bodyguards who suffered the most casualties and only had a few people left. All the Blood Angels immediately carried the wounded with determined expressions and ran quickly towards the location of the Stormbird transport, also leaving space for you two Primarchs to talk. Little brother, thank you. If it weren't for your arrival, the number of casualties among the sons would have been even greater. I may have won the final victory, but it would definitely not have been as easy as it is now. So, I must thank you for your great help to me personally, and to the Blood Sons. Sanguinius, with his golden hair swaying slightly, slowly fixed his deep eyes on your face, and said to you in a soft voice. It's nothing, this is my duty as a human Primarch. Brother, to be honest, how much of the situation did your psychic powers foresee regarding this great rebellion launched by Horus? You raised your head and drank the fresh water in the kettle, hung the kettle on your waist, and then looked up at him and asked. I need to correct a misunderstanding of yours. that is, psychic prophecies are not as accurate as you imagine, but more like a sense of déjà vu that can only be understood. I inadvertently saw your arrival from the River of Time, and also saw the tragic killings between many brothers, and the final game I will eventually face. At this time, Sanguinius, who couldn't help but let out a sigh, suddenly turned his huge body. His gaze looked at the Stormbird transports that were slowly rising not far away. But since I'm here, the most important thing is to avoid that kind of situation from happening. We can. You frowned slightly, looked up at him, and said in a solemn tone. However, Sanguinius, who turned his gaze back again, directly raised his hand and interrupted your next words. He continued to say to you in a low voice, "Little brother, you still don't understand, that is something that my sons as a father have to face. Do you know what kind of fate our entire human empire will face if the father is defeated in the battle with Horus? This cold universe and galaxy can tolerate the failure of individuals, but it can never tolerate the defeat of a race. However, as far as I know, the Emperor is an immortal. He possesses an immortal body, coupled with that psychic power as powerful as a star. Even if he is reborn, it will only take some time. As long as the Emperor himself is unharmed, what if Terra is handed over to Horus?" You took a deep breath and said with a frown, "Little brother, you are still too young, you have never followed the Father for a long time, so your understanding of him is not enough. Do you think that our Father, the creator of the human empire, the Lord of humanity, the Emperor, would easily abandon those human people who have always believed in him and are willing to fight to the death for him? I think, in this way, you should also have your own judgment, right? The Emperor will not, and neither will I, and you will not give up fighting for the human race. This is the obsession of people like us, and it is also the most tragic thing. In fact, your arrival has ultimately proved one thing. That is that some things cannot be changed by human power, and are bound to happen. Little brother, let me ask you a question. After you and I meet, if my future really changes, then why are you still here now?" At this moment, Primarch Sanguinius's sincere words were no less than a heavenly rain of ice or an earthquake impact to you. Especially his last question. While making your whole body subconsciously feel numb, it also produced a sense of despair and powerlessness from the bottom of your heart towards all the past battles and killings. Has your arrival really changed something? If you successfully allowed Sanguinius to survive facing Horus, then it would mean that the Emperor did not ascend the Golden Throne due to excessive injuries. If this continues to develop, some of the rebel Primarchs still have the possibility of being rescued and returning to the Empire. If the Emperor himself did not choose to ascend the Golden Throne due to excessive injuries, then the Ecclesiarchy would not exist, and there would be no hope of continuous gathering of human faith for tens of thousands of years. Then it would also mean that the so-called God Emperor would not be born. Since the God Emperor, who is comparable to a god of the warp, has never been born, then where did you yourself come from at this moment? If the past can be easily changed, then why haven't you disappeared? Perhaps, just like the words that Sanguinius unintentionally said when you and he first met. You are just a small ripple occasionally stirred up in the river of time from beginning to end. Little brother, you don't have to belittle yourself, let alone feel despair. Because, the battlefield of us brothers is here. But your battlefield has never been now or in the past. Your hope, your battle, is in the distant future. At this moment, Sanguinius, who glanced at the blood-red sunset in the sky, suddenly stepped forward. He raised a huge golden palm and heavily patted your shattered shoulder armor. The other party's low and firm voice was like a drumstick, heavily shattering the powerlessness and despair that was gradually spreading in your heart. Sanguinius, I think I understand. Don't worry, I will continue to fight. Your whole person instantly came back to your senses. You quickly took a deep breath, raised your gray-haired and blood-red head and stared at the other party's handsome face, and said in a deep voice. But, what should we do next? I can't really do nothing, can I? At this moment, the other party clearly saw your fighting will return to your mind, and also heard your question. So, a faint smile seemed to appear on Sanguinius's handsome face. He slightly shook his smooth golden head. A pair of deep eyes slowly looked upwards, staring at the deep blue sky where the heavy clouds were gradually dissipating. In the first month, you and Primarch Sanguinius left the war-torn Cygnus Prime and re-boarded the Blood Angel's flagship, the Red Tier. And Sanguinius's first action upon returning to the flagship was to immediately summon all the Blood Angels and, in front of the entire fleet of Imperial Navy personnel, formally announce that you were the last Primarch of the Imperium of Man to be found, and a scion of the Emperor. You vaguely guessed the Primarch's true intentions, and you simply couldn't refuse his kindness. Currently, due to the continued influence of the warp storms, all warp routes to Terra could no longer be clearly observed by navigators, and even the light of the Astronomicon above Terra had completely disappeared. Fortunately, the Pharos beacon in the Ultramar system's 500 worlds suddenly lit up like a lighthouse, pointing you in the right direction. After discussing it with Primarch Sanguinius, you decided to follow the predetermined path of fate and lead the Blood Angels fleet towards the Ultramar system. With all preparations complete, as the Geller field continued to spread and envelop, the entire fleet entered the mysterious and treacherous warp in succession. You also took this opportunity to have the tech priests repair your power armor while engaging in a more detailed and in-depth conversation with Sanguinius. You told him about the origin and nature of the warp, and the truth about the 4 Chaos Gods. After you quickly finished telling him about the future of the Imperium of Man, Primarch Sanguinius did not show any emotional fluctuations on his face for a long time. Finally, Sanguinius, with a sigh, told you that once you successfully arrived in Ultramar, you must tell everything to Primarch Guilliman again. As the most skilled planner and strategist among the Primarchs, if there could be some more long-term planning, then the future of the Imperium of Man might undergo even greater changes. However, as the voyage progressed, some changes occurred within the Blood Angels fleet. Even though the Geller field had not failed, some mortal crew members still showed special signs of warp corruption. You believed that this was a threat and warning from the Chaos Gods, who were unwilling to see greater changes in the River of Time. You unhesitatingly led a portion of the Blood Angels to personally execute those mortal crew members. Subsequently, with the Primarch's approval, you gradually began to learn more about the Blood Angels Legion. In the second month, with the gradual deactivation of the Geller field, the entire fleet you were in safely emerged from the warp and successfully entered the Ultramar system. You felt a bit puzzled as to why you had left the warp unscathed. But even Sanguinius couldn't give a correct answer. Your fleet successfully arrived at the void route that could approach the Ultramar 500 worlds. However, just as you were feeling excited about seeing more Primarchs, some unexpected situations happened again. The Blood Angels flagship, the Red Tear, that you were on had been silently infiltrated. You personally witnessed an Astartes patrol squad being stripped of their power armor and skin like prey by unknown enemies, their bloodied bodies hanging in the most conspicuous location inside the flagship. At this moment, you stared at the utterly miserable corpses of your battle brothers, instinctively tightening your grip on the Blood Reaper in your palm. With a blank expression, you said to Sanguinius, who was like a volcano about to erupt beside you, with a sneer, "There's no need to guess, it must be Conrad Kurz. I was wondering why Chaos didn't have any backup plans, but now it seems he's become their pawn to deal with us. Brother, I am, to some extent, immortal, so if I unfortunately die later, don't hold too much resentment towards Kurz. We need to persuade him to turn back. Even if a traitor legion can't have too much impact on the future war, a legion that defects is a heavy blow to Horus. Little brother, I can't guarantee you that. I can only say that I will try not to butcher him." Before you could finish speaking, Sanguinius, with an icy expression, suddenly spread open the pair of pure white wings behind his massive form. An angel bodyguard standing behind him immediately stepped forward and handed the spear of Telesto, with its teardrop-shaped tip, to the Primarch's golden hand. You took a deep breath and drew the furnace heart from the waist of your newly repaired power armor. Sanguinius then ordered all the Blood Angels to gather together and guard the bridge and important compartments to prevent the Night Lords from launching more sneak attacks. Immediately afterward, the two of you joined forces to conduct a carpet search of the entire flagship. However, even with two Primarchs working together, they did not find any trace of Kurz. You believed that you might have underestimated his stealth abilities. Perhaps at some location you had just passed, Night Lord Kurz was watching your every move from the shadows not far away. Just then, you heard an urgent call from the blood angels in your ears. A terrifying giant that an ordinary Astartes could not fight was launching an attack on the bridge. Sanguinius, with an icy expression, instantly spread his white wings and sped along the metal passageway towards the bridge. You also immediately activated your power armor and quickly ran forward. However, after Sanguinius's massive figure completely disappeared from your sight, your beastly instincts reacted one after another, and you abruptly stopped moving forward. You subconsciously twitched your nose. Your keen senses vaguely smelled a hint of death. A feint. I'm afraid you're not the only one who infiltrated the flagship, are you? Conrad Kurz. You suddenly asked in a deep voice to the empty surroundings without turning your head. You couldn't help but tighten your grip on the Blood Reaper in your palm, your finger on the trigger of the furnace heart almost ready to fire. Tisk, as expected of a hound, your sense of smell is indeed sharp. Just then, a massive figure wearing a scarlet cloak and dark blue power armor covered in countless human remains slowly appeared within your field of vision. I can tell you clearly. My dearest brother, this is a personal grudge between you and me. I plan to return the stab you gave me back then to you now. Hey, even if you and I had no grudges in the past, we do now. You stared intently at Conrad Kurz in front of you, sneering. You instantly raised the heart of the forge in your palm and pulled the trigger without hesitation. Countless azure plasma bolts sprayed rapidly towards the opponent's towering figure like a dense rain. You then used Shadow Step, your entire being resembling a jet black phantom as you quickly moved behind the opponent. A petty trick. The expressionless Conrad Kurz instantly raised his two ceramite gauntlets. His artificer lightning claws named Mercy and Forgiveness immediately emitted a cold metallic gleam, and he moved and dodged like a dark shadow, avoiding the surging tide of plasma. You had to temporarily change your landing position in midair to prevent yourself from becoming the target of the plasma tide. And as your mag boots touched down, you violently swung the blood scythe, only for it to be forcibly blocked by the opponent's pair of artificer lightning claws at the edge of the sharp blade. At that moment, you took a deep breath filled with all sorts of rotting smells. Conrad, you fucking need a bath. You subconsciously mocked him. The heart of the forge in your other palm was instantly discarded onto the ground, and a ceramite power fist clenched tightly, accompanied by the dazzling light of the elbow thruster, heavily struck Conrad's abdominal armor. Boom. After receiving Korn's blessing, your terrifying power, which was infinitely close to that of a Primarch, caused the opponent's face to suddenly change color, and even made him take several steps back. Chi. However, at this moment, the noticeably quicker reacting Conrad stepped forward again, and at the same time, he released one of the artificer lightning claws that was blocking the blood scythe. In a flash, several extremely sharp power weapons pierced into the inside of your ceramite breastplate like swords, penetrating between your chest and abdomen. Immediately afterwards, your entire body was forcibly lifted into the air by the opponent's artificer lightning claws. You stared at the other party's expressionless, sinister face and let out an angry roar. Conrad, don't get it wrong, brother, I'm called Night Haunter. Conrad's dark eyes showed no emotional fluctuations, and he subconsciously lowered the artificer lightning claw that was holding the blood scythe. At this moment, you suddenly gritted your teeth and yanked the blood scythe in your palm. In an instant, the green light entwined sharp blade cut into the opponent's heavy shoulder armor and easily cut Conrad's tough flesh. Looking to die, the injured Conrad instantly surged with anger. He didn't care about the threat of the blood scythe at all, and quickly raised his other artificer lightning claw, forcibly stabbing it into your chest, completely burning and destroying most of your internal organs. A stream of pale golden blood continuously flowed from the corner of your mouth. The medical life support system inside the power armor quickly injected the remaining panacea into your body. Your other hand quietly reached towards the bottom of the power pack, where a melt-a-bomb that you always carried with you was stored. However, Conrad, whose senses were equally sharp, seemed to have noticed your little trick. You want to try that again? Enraged, he instantly swung his two artificer lightning claws, tearing your entire chest open without hesitation. Accompanied by the faint sound of internal organs sliding out of the wound, your broken body fell heavily to the ground, making a series of dull thuds. Your two most important hearts were completely damaged and destroyed, and a large amount of Emperor's blood flowed out of your body. Your consciousness gradually entered a hazy state. Just at this moment, you faintly heard the whistling sound of wings like thunder in your ears, as well as the angry roar from the Primarch Sanguinius. Conrad Kurz. Prepare to die. A hint of a smile couldn't help but appear on your lips. Your breathing completely stopped its final struggle. Your vision gradually fell into darkness. You are dead. This simulation is over, lasting 60 days. The options available for retention in this simulation are as follows. 1. Spear of Telesto, Primarch. Note: this is one of the personal weapons used by Primarch Sanguinius during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy. Note: its blade is shaped like an elongated and hollow teardrop, symbolizing a drop of blood shed by Sanguinius when he was loyal to the Emperor. The shaft is also engraved with the image of Sanguinius wearing a hood and spreading his wings, and beneath the image of Sanguinius, the mark of purity personally inscribed by the Emperor is clearly visible. Note: this spear can instantly release a powerful energy that will completely evaporate and annihilate any creature not bearing the blood of Sanguinius. Its melee power is indescribable. Note: the Spear of Telesto was once lost during Sanguinius's final battle against Horus alone. Later, the Blood Angels chapter, deploying all its forces, retrieved it from an orc warlord and enshrined it together with the imperial banner of an unknown Primarch. Note: to charge into the fray is to embrace death. A point of cold light arrives first, followed by the spear emerging like a dragon. 2. Mercy and Forgiveness, Primarch. Note: these are a pair of Artificer lightning claws that Primarch Conrad Kurz uses year-round. Note: the origin and history of these weapons are very mysterious. Conrad has never revealed them to outsiders, but judging from the collision between the power claws and the weapons of other Primarchs, the material itself is not weak. Note: in fact, even the names that these weapons currently possess are just what the Sons of the Night Lord's Legion call them. How the Primarch himself views them remains unknown. Note: to some extent, the fact that his personal weapons are named Mercy and Forgiveness is a great irony to Primarch Conrad Kurz himself. The number of innocent civilians who have died at his hands is simply countless. It is said that he even devoured human children like a beast. Note: that broken power sword was only 0.01 centimeters away from me that year, and then, that inhuman wolf cub grinned and stabbed me. Conrad Kurz tearfully complained to a statue of the Emperor made of flesh and blood. 3. Gene Senses Neuro Link, Sanguinius's Mercy, Primarch. Note: this string of flesh constructs composed of 4 nerve sheaths, which must be implanted into the brain and spinal cord, is a replica carefully cultivated from the organ cells extracted from Sanguinius. Note: it seems to have been strengthened and blessed by the Emperor. Note: its existence will grant you a basic ability to successfully obtain the memories of your enemies by devouring their blood and flesh. Its special ability has unexpectedly received the blessing of Primarch Sanguinius himself. You will need long-term exploration and use to fully master it. Note: little brother, after I die, you will be me. This is the murmur from Primarch Sanguinius in his dying moments. Note: when you gaze into the abyss also gazes into you. Devouring the flesh and blood of enemies is acceptable, but don't eat too much, the master of mankind said without turning his head. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. The simulation ended once again. Wearing his power armor and sitting on the edge of the metal bed, Rochefort instantly regained his senses. Conrad Kurz: if I ever run into you again, I'll make sure you never forget it. At this moment, Rochefort, his consciousness still immersed in the shadow of death, couldn't help but let out a low roar. Afterward, he took a deep breath to calm his agitated mood. Only then did he refocus all his attention back on the simulator's page. Rochefort, his brow slightly furrowed, still habitually read through the annotations of all the rewards. This was not only a long-cultivated habit, but also allowed him to gain much information and knowledge that he had never known in the past. Soon after, Rochefort, having re-prepared himself mentally, unhesitatingly raised a finger and selected the enhancement surgery reward on the simulator. Hiss! Instantly, a severe pain that ordinary people could hardly bear instantly occupied his entire mind. The sensation of wriggling from the brain and spinal cord even caused Rochefort, driven by the power armor, to kneel on one knee on the metal floor. The next second, Rochefort's wide-open eyes were filled with fine blood vessels that gradually emerged due to the pain. At the same time, right behind his back, that is, at the position of the shoulder blades, there was even a vague, strange illusion that something was about to hatch. Ah! Accompanied by a painful roar that Rochefort subconsciously let out. His ceramite fist slammed heavily on the metal floor, smashing out a deep pit. Immediately afterward, a pair of massive wings, seemingly intricately woven from blood-colored and black-spotted feathers, suddenly burst forth from Rochefort's back. What the hell is this? Rochefort, whose physical pain was slowly receding, suddenly felt an extreme desire from the depths of his soul for any flesh and blood. The next second, a hazy scene that made it difficult to control the anger in his heart suddenly appeared before his eyes. Inside a cold, dim, and magnificent hall, War Master Horus, wearing Terminator armor, twisted his expression as he forcibly stabbed a sharp blade into Sanguinius's body. Rochefort didn't even need to think too much. He instantly understood that this was the scene of Primarch Sanguinius's death. It was also the terrifying curse that had plagued the Blood Angels chapter for countless years. The thirst and the black rage. This is supposed to be Sanguinius's blessing. At this moment, Rochefort, with snow-white fangs exposed in his mouth, squeezed out a complaint with extreme difficulty from between his teeth. However, just as Rochefort thought he was about to fall into an uncontrollable berserk state. Whether it was the extreme desire for flesh and blood, or the terrifying black rage brought about by the tragic scene of Sanguinius's death, it quickly receded from his body. Huff! Rochefort, covered in sweat, subconsciously breathed a sigh of relief. Still in shock, he slowly drove the power armor to stand up. Then, with a furrowed brow, he turned his head to look at the pair of massive black and red wings that still stood behind his back. Dash 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 dash. Soon after a series of tests by Rochefort, he also gradually figured out the special abilities brought about by the pair of black and red wings. In addition to the basics possessed by Sanguinius's gene-derived sensory nerves. That is, the ability to devour the flesh and blood of enemies to obtain memories. Rochefort even possessed a special blessing power that could inflict the thirst and the black rage on surrounding targets. For comrades in the same camp, this might be a blessing to increase combat power on the extreme battlefield. For enemies, the sudden special blessing would also become a curse power that they themselves could hardly get rid of. However, Rochefort never quite understood why he would possess such a strange special blessing. Moreover, this was definitely not the Emperor's wish. It was more likely that Sanguinius had other changes to this enhancement surgery's blessing. Perhaps, only when I truly meet the Astartes of the Blood Angels chapter will I be able to completely figure out the specific truth. Rochefort, his brow slightly furrowed, vaguely had some thoughts about this. But he did not intend to reveal the slightest bit of information since he had not fully figured out the special blessing. Afterward, concentrating his mind, he successfully retracted the black and red wings through will manipulation. And Rochefort also very helplessly confirmed one thing. The pair of black and red wings that he possessed were more like a manifestation of psychic power. Therefore, it was impossible for Rochefort himself to obtain the ability to fly like Sanguinius. Dash 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 dash. In the following period, Rochefort, whose life gradually returned to normal, became busy once again. He and Iron Man David discussed how to utilize the base facilities left behind by Hydra. For example, whether to simply use those locations as warehouses to store necessary supplies, or to send some manpower for daily maintenance. In addition, Rochefort was also selecting suitable candidates from the Gang Dogs combat squad. This group of people would be sent into the Warhammer universe's Carcharodons chapter. On the one hand, it was to test the phenomenon of chaos corruption on the natives. And if there were not many accidents, they were very likely to become new blood of the Carcharodons chapter. Whether they became ordinary Astartes or apothecaries, it was a good thing for Rochefort. Soon after, Rochefort determined a total of 10 daredevil candidates. Rochefort came up and frankly confessed to everyone the danger of this mission and the possibility of no return. But still, no one showed the slightest bit of timidity or intention to back down. Afterward, Rochefort also asked them in turn about their last wishes and the payment recipients of the pension. Thus, some people chose to leave all the money to their never-before-seen parents. Some people left all their wealth to their friends. As for those lonely gang dogs, after discussing it, they decided to donate the pension to some orphanages. Next, Rochefort led everyone to the circular square deep in the base, and came to the statue of the emperor. He taught everyone how to pray to the emperor, and also told everyone some things related to the warp. Of course, Rochefort only told them how to detect the phenomenon of chaos corruption in advance and the dangerous signs of psychic power. When everyone present had indeed developed a certain degree of faith in the emperor, and had practiced the prayer method until they were familiar with it. In order to ensure the survival rate of the gang dogs, Rochefort gave everyone the emperor's blood and panacea contained in small bottles respectively. With all preparations completed, Rochefort contacted Tiberos, the chapter master of the Carcharodon's chapter, through the simulator's diplomacy page. He was temporarily unable to unilaterally open a space rift from the native side to the Carcharodon's chapter. He still needed the cooperation of the other party's librarian to complete this transportation plan. Buzz buzz buzz. Soon after, accompanied by a suddenly opened space rift and the vague call from the librarian, the gang dogs present made the Aquila salute to Rochefort. Then, they walked into the space rift without hesitation. May the Emperor protect your souls. At this moment, Rochefort, his gaze fixed on the gradually disappearing backs of everyone. He took a deep breath and said to himself, due to the different flow of time, Roche was unable to know how long it would take the Flesh Tearers chapter to produce concrete results. So, he busied himself with other things again. Soon after, Roche returned to the base hall. He summoned an automatic servitor to remove his power armor. Then he sat beside the metal round table, assisting Iron Man David in planning many things for the team's future. At the same time, Roche, who occasionally slacked off, also used the simulator's diplomacy page. He re-released a batch of precious local specialties, such as power swords made of Antarctic vibranium, trying to establish diplomatic relations with other imperial forces. Compared to establishing contact with more Astartes chapters, Roche was even more eager to have a cordial meeting with the Adeptus Mechanicus. Immediately afterward, Roche, who subconsciously swiped a few times on the simulator page, also discovered that the Golden Throne support prayer page had already completed its rotation and update. Many new tasks were once again presented in front of him. However, Roche did not immediately set out to prepare for battle. Instead, he pre-selected some support missions with suitable combat scales as options for future actions. My lord, one of our cargo trading plans has temporarily encountered trouble. Just at this moment, Iron Man David's mechanical voice suddenly interrupted Rock's contemplation. He casually closed the simulator page, turned his head to look at Iron Man David, and asked softly, David, where did the problem occur? The Donggying base, or over in Europe? Hearing Rock's guess, Iron Man David, whose eye sockets were flashing blue light, slowly shook his metal head and said, My lord, it's neither. Do you still remember that you once allowed Reditus to collect raw vibranium from all over the world? Reditus, in order to be convenient, pushed this task to me again, and I successfully found the only black market seller in the world who has a large number of precious goods, a black market smuggler named Ulysses Clow. The original contact action went smoothly, and I remotely directed an external business team of Imperial Heavy Industries to reach a transaction intention with the other party, and purchased all the raw vibranium in the other party's hands at a price 20% higher than the market price. But for some reason, Clow temporarily changed his mind. He wanted to communicate face-to-face with the behind-the-scenes trader, instead of simply exchanging money for goods. At this moment, after listening to Iron Man David's words, Roche blinked his eyes with a cold smile on the corner of his mouth. He said in a deep voice, David, Didn't you tell him that this is a big taboo in black market transactions? Or did he vaguely guess the true background of our buyers? My lord, I think this possibility is not non-existent, perhaps it is because of this that he has other ideas. Iron Man David, whose eye sockets were flashing blue light, analyzed and said. I even used the means of erasing every penny from the other party's bank account as a threat, but I couldn't completely dispel Ulysses's idea of face-to-face communication. If a desperado doesn't want money, then he must have other demands. Very good, we don't have to pay. Roche, who was squinting his eyes, suddenly stood up from beside the metal round table. He lowered his head and stared at Iron Man David, and said in a calm tone. Didn't we also scavenge a few complete brainwashing devices from the Hydra base? We can just use him to test the specific effects. Since he doesn't want to receive money and deliver goods safely, then he will become our free labor force completely in the future. Dash 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 dash. Since Roche had issued the final order, then Iron Man David naturally went to execute it. This matter didn't even require Roche to take action himself. A unmanned Thunderhawk transport plane loaded with the Ponderer system, plus 2 squads of Aeositra Carvo. It took a total of about 5 hours to successfully capture Ulysses Clow from inside a giant oil tanker that had been drifting on the Indian Ocean for a long time. And also seized nearly 200 kilograms of raw vibranium. And this is basically most of the vibranium that has been scattered outside of Wakanda, the place of origin. Soon after, Ulysses Clow, covered in the flesh and blood fragments of his mercenary subordinates, his eyes filled with horror, was firmly bound by the mechanical tentacles of 2 Aeositra Carvo, and forcibly dragged into the brightly lit base hall. At the same time, Roche, holding a cup of hot tea in his hand, was sitting beside the metal round table, staring at the approaching opponent without any expression. You are Ulysses Clow. I heard you want to have a face-to-face communication with us. Roche, squinting his eyes, raised the teacup in his palm. After taking a sip of the scalding hot tea, he asked lightly. Wait, strange friend, I didn't mean anything else at all. I simply just wanted to raise the selling price of vibranium. In recent years, Wakanda's vibranium recovery operations have become more and more intensive, and there is less and less vibranium circulating on the market. I was also forced to do so. At this moment, he couldn't help but widen his eyes. Ulysses Clow, whose whole body trembled subconsciously, hurriedly explained to Roche. So, you didn't guess our background identity at all. Roche, who casually put down the teacup, blinked his eyes. He stared at the other party and asked again. If I tell the truth, can you spare my life? As for those vibranium, just take it as my apology to you. Ulysses Clow, whose lips were moving, turned his constantly flickering frightened eyes, and said with a frustrated face. If I said that when I first came into contact, I didn't know anything about your background, but when these robots descended on my ship and launched a large-scale massacre, I vaguely guessed your background identity, because among the major forces currently, there is only one that always likes to use robots to rush face, that is the Terra Stellar Army Corps. Congratulations, friend, you have learned to answer quickly. Just at this moment, Roche, whose mouth faintly revealed a smile, raised his palm and interrupted the other party's words. Immediately afterward, Roche turned his head and instructed Iron Man David, who was standing nearby. David, take him to be brainwashed. Also, by the way, tell Redditus to stay away from those brainwashing devices. Without my order, it is forbidden for it to carry out any research. At this moment, hearing Rock's words in his ears, and also seeing the black skeleton Iron Man David who was stepping forward, Ulysses Clow's facial expression instantly twisted. He shouted in panic towards Rock's direction. Wait, I know a top-secret route that can secretly sneak into Wakanda. I can get more vibranium for you. I also know the true identities of some Wakandans exiled overseas. We can use them. However, Roche, who was sitting beside the metal round table, once again interrupted the other party's words. Only to see him staring at the middle-aged man who was firmly bound by mechanical tentacles, and said earnestly, There is no need to struggle, After you have completely dedicated your loyalty to us, you will do anything with 100% dedication. Ulysses Clow, welcome to be a member of our team, you are completely free now. The final effect of Hydra's brainwashing device was still excellent. Soon after, the blood and minced meat all over his body were thoroughly cleaned. Ulysses Clow, with a smile on his face, once again returned to Luo Sha. He first awkwardly performed an airy salute towards Luo Sha. Then, he immediately began to talk incessantly to Luo Sha about the crimes he had committed in his past life. In fact, as a smuggler, Clow had not done anything heinous. He was simply greedy, coupled with a twisted mentality of almost jealousy and discrimination towards the Wakandans. As a white South African, Clow was very envious that these black-skinned fellows possessed technological levels and precious metals far exceeding the outside world. Install the latest version. Close black lens bracket. Also, because of his own overly inferior complex, he developed a strange hatred for Wakanda's closed-door policy of not sharing vibranium technology. Therefore, he chose to constantly oppose the Wakandans. As for Luo Sha, he personally didn't have any special views on the Wakandans. He just needed more vibranium materials. If the conditions were right, the technology of vibranium they possessed could also become a part of the team's technological reserve. Thus, Ulysses Clow, who had become free labor, immediately led several combat squads of Aoi monster mech guards back on the long road to the African continent. His only task was to obtain as much vibranium and technology from Wakanda as possible, until he was captured or destroyed by the Wakandans. Subsequently, a report from Iron Man David was once again transmitted to Luo Sha's ears. The Titania, who had been imprisoned for a long time, finally chose to soften. And she had safely accepted brainwashing and was assigned to Jessica's command, becoming one of the combat instructors for the special agent trainees. In fact, if it weren't for Iron Man David's kind reminder, Luo Sha had even forgotten that Titania and some S.H.I.E.L.D. agents were still imprisoned in the Gemini Island base. He originally wanted Iron Man David to brainwash those S.H.I.E.L.D. agents as well, to completely eliminate the small hidden danger in the base. But then Luo Sha remembered Natasha, who had not yet returned. After all, she was also a member of the team. Let Natasha herself deal with her former subordinates. Dash 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 dash. Inside the casting factory located on Gemini Island, Luo Sha, with a peaceful expression, was tightly gripping a South Pole vibranium power sword. He was vigorously hacking back and forth at a set of power armor shells made of raw vibranium, conducting experiments. Ding ding ding, along with the continuous collision sounds. Even though the blade of the power sword had activated a deep blue disintegration force field, it didn't produce the slightest destructive effect on the vibranium shell. Subsequently, Luo Sha, squinting his eyes, turned around and picked up a super phase sword surrounded by green light from the side. And he took advantage of the situation to swing it violently towards the vibranium shell. The next second, the armor shell made of raw vibranium was successfully and completely split in two by the necromantic weapon that defied all scientific logic. Okay, I still overestimated the performance of vibranium, or rather, underestimated the technological level of the Necrons in space. Luo Sha, dropping the super phase sword, couldn't help but shake his head and casually complained. Lord Luo Sha, raw vibranium is already a special metallic material far beyond human imagination. After my previous countless experiments, various types of explosive bombs and power swords, plus laser weapons, are basically unable to break through the external defense, unless thermal melting bombs are used, but to be honest, there is probably no substance in nature that can withstand the terrifying power of thermal melting bombs. Just at this moment, Doom, carrying several pairs of mechanical arms on his back, slowly walked up to Luo Sha. He said with a sigh, "Doom, you're right, the only problem is that the output of raw vibranium is indeed too small. Even if we have more stable acquisition channels, wanting to have everyone wear vibranium power armor is also a pipe dream." Luo Sha nodded slightly and said in a deep voice to Doom beside him, Besides some scraps left for you to use for research, the remaining vibranium is basically used to cast this set of power armor shells, and this hasn't even been used to make the skeleton and more servo devices. Lord Luo Sha, your power armor is, after all, a finely crafted creation. It doesn't matter if we use more materials. I think ordinary soldiers and warriors only need mass-produced auxiliary power armor to cope with most battlefield situations. Hearing Luo Sha's words, Doom lowered his head slightly and pondered for a moment, then continued. Moreover, the number of auxiliary power armor we currently have in reserve is already enough to arm all the gang dogs. Are you planning to transform them all into stormtrooper squads? It's not urgent right now. It's also a good thing to let them have some illusions about becoming a member of the stormtroopers. However, you can choose 5 people from the gang dogs to be your combat squad. At this moment, Luo Sha casually put down the super phase sword. He turned his head to Doom and smiled. Then, Luo Sha walked towards the outside of the casting factory, saying without turning his head. And Doom, hearing these words, was slightly stunned at first. He slowly took a deep breath, quickly thinking about which familiar gang dogs would be more suitable squad candidates. Soon after, Doom chose the gang dog whose front teeth had never been filled, whose real name was Luther, to become the first candidate for the stormtrooper squad. Subsequently, several gang dogs who had a good relationship with Doom, and whose own combat abilities were also relatively outstanding, successfully advanced into a member of the stormtrooper squad in the envious eyes of others. Luo Sha didn't pay too much attention or interference to this. After all, the stormtroopers in the second squad, besides performing necessary tasks, the rest of the time they belonged to Doom's personal guards. However, not long after, just as Luo Sha was preparing to wear the vibranium-shelled power armor and once again perform the prayer support mission to obtain throne coins, a piece of bad news from Iron Man David made him temporarily put aside everything at hand. My lord, the Dongying base has really encountered some unexpected situations this time. Ms. Mariko has sent us a request for help. At this moment, Iron Man David, with blue light flickering in its eye sockets, quickly strode forward. It walked straight into Luo Sha's private lounge and said to Luo Sha, who was studying the prayer mission. Isn't Bucky and old John taking care of things over there? Plus Mariko, a believer who is even more devout than me, what internal troubles could there be? Luo Sha, frowning slightly, slowly got up from the metal bed. He stared at Iron Man David in front of him and asked with a puzzled tone. My lord, I'm afraid you've completely misunderstood. It's really not an internal problem at the Dongying base. Iron Man David shook its metal head slightly and said to Luo Sha in a solemn tone. In fact, our base has been attacked by external enemies. Old John and Bucky and others were defeated by those invaders and seriously injured. Even the ninja force of the Shida family suffered heavy casualties. If it weren't for a group of super-powered mercenaries they had recruited earlier playing an unexpected trump card role, then it's hard to say whether the Dongying base would still be here now. Moreover, we need to personally check the specific losses the base has suffered. Previously, only Luo Sha had the opportunity to raid other people's bases. This was the first time his own territory had been raided by enemies. However, Luo Sha didn't experience any extra emotional fluctuations upon learning of this situation. He immediately ordered Iron Man David to gather Doom and his stormtrooper squad. In addition to the mind-controlled legion composed of 5 Leviathan Guard units, as well as corresponding supplies and equipment, they prepared to travel to the East Ying base together to provide support and carry out necessary retaliation. Buzz buzz buzz. Soon after, accompanied by the gradually opening metal ceiling above the hangar platform, Luo Sha, wearing a set of vibranium-powered armor, and Doom and others, successively stepped onto the Thunderhawk transport plane heading to the East Ying base. When everything was ready, led by the Thunderhawk transport plane piloted by Iron Man David, a total of 3 Thunderhawk transport planes took off one after another, slowly flying into the depths of the thick clouds. Tokyo, Mount Fuji Base. This volcano base, which originally belonged to Madame Hydra, had already been successfully taken over by the Yoshida family, and it has gradually become one of the action locations radiating throughout the island and even Asia. However, at the moment, the brightly lit base unexpectedly presented an extremely dismal scene. On the metal floor, which was covered with various energy destruction traces, countless automatic servo robots carrying heavy logging guns were scattered all over the place like metal parts. At the same time, many solemn-looking Yashida family servants shuttled inside the base. They carefully cleaned up the traces of destruction on the scene, and tried their best to rescue the combat personnel who were suffering serious injuries. Just at this moment, old John, whose sturdy arm was temporarily wrapped with a white bandage, walked with an unkind expression behind Bucky, who was coordinating and directing the rescue team. "Bucky boy, how are our losses being tallied? The logistics personnel of the base have suffered the least losses, because they are basically replaced by automatic servo robots. However, the ninja force stationed here has suffered relatively heavy casualties. The number of people killed on the spot alone is more than 100, and the number of injured and disabled is close to 500. This is enough to make Mariko and Yukio feel distressed. A ninja force of over 1,000 was lost by more than half at once." At this moment, Bucky, whose face still had traces of blood and bruises, turned around expressionlessly. He stared at old John, who was close at hand, and asked, "Old man, how is your injury? I remember Mariko gave you a special approval for the panacea. Why don't you use it?" Hearing the inquiry from Bucky, old John took a deep breath, shook his head, and said, "Asgardian berserkers are never afraid of a little pain. Moreover, the remaining number of panaceas is not much, so let's leave it to the children on the training ground as a life-saving insurance. Bucky boy, do you have any clues about the enemy who attacked us now? To be honest, I'm also confused right now. What I can be sure of is that our series of actions in Asia before were basically related to reconnaissance and infiltration, and we never had any conflicts with any forces, let alone caused any deaths." Old John's voice just fell. Bucky couldn't help but smile bitterly. He subconsciously raised his hand and rubbed a bruise on his cheek, and continued with a puzzled tone. "Those attackers can't be Hydra, because the rest of Hydra in other places have basically been cleaned up by the captain and the others. The remaining Hydra are shrinking back to the American continent, and Thor and Tony and others have never stopped cleaning up and suppressing them. The most important thing is, old John, have you noticed? I still remember that the leading attackers had Asian facial features, but their style of doing things doesn't seem like it's from official forces, because there is no sign of mercy for ordinary soldiers. So, I think we should wait for Luo Shaw and Iron Man David to come before we talk about this, Just at this moment, some movement came from the communication device located at Bucky's ear. After he listened carefully, a relieved smile finally appeared on his face covered with bruises. "Old John, our support has arrived." Boom boom boom. The vector engines of the Thunderhawk transport plane gradually stopped roaring. After the metal hatch at the rear slowly opened, Luo Shaw, wearing vibranium-powered armor, and Doom, wearing a dark green cloak, and his stormtrooper squad slowly stepped onto the ground of the East Ying base. And Luo Shaw, squinting his eyes, saw Bucky, who could be said to have a bruised nose and swollen face, and old John with a bandage wrapped around one arm at a glance. He drove the powered armor and stepped forward, overlooking the two old friends in front of him, and asked with concern, "Are everyone's injuries serious? What force attacked us?" "No one in our command echelon has been lost for the time being, but the casualties of the ninja force are relatively serious, and the number of automatic servo robots has also been reduced by 2/3. Bucky solemnly reported everything about the East Ying base to Luo Shaw. Before long, Mariko, with a fanatical look, and Yukio, with a frown, also came to the location of the hangar platform to greet Luo Shaw and others. So, everyone went together to the interior of the Mount Fuji base. They chose a quiet conference room to start a more detailed discussion. Taking this opportunity, Bucky and others also recounted the time and process of the base being attacked in detail to Luo Shaw and them. About 16 hours ago, hundreds of attackers disguised themselves as several mountaineering teams, deceived the base's outer perimeter guard team and automatic servo robots. Then, they used high explosives they carried to blast open a spare entrance of the base and launched an attack on the interior of the base. Originally, the garrison force of the East Ying base had a pre-arranged plan to deal with this level of attack. Not to mention that there were automatic servo robots everywhere in the base that could be equipped with heavy firearms at will. However, the 4 leading figures were actually energy-based super-powered people. And the energy-inhibiting collars and other technological restriction methods that the Gemini Island base got from Hydra had not yet been distributed. So, in just one encounter, the garrison force of the East Ying base suffered very serious casualties. When Bucky and Old John arrived here by helicopter, the attackers' team completely suppressed the entire East Ying base with only 4 super-powered people. Of course, Bucky and Old John hadn't done nothing while staying in East Ying for a long time. They also gathered a group of super-powered people from all over the world through various methods. And it was precisely with the strong help of these mercenaries. That's how they barely repelled the invasion of this group of attackers. In this regard, Luo Sha, who lowered his head and pondered for a moment. He first admitted that the Gemini Island base was full of slack in the management of the East Ying base. Otherwise, under normal circumstances, the corresponding materials and technological methods obtained by the main base will inevitably be distributed to each base simultaneously. However, in fact, not only did the East Ying base not transfer more powerful Leviathan guards to become defensive aids, even the energy-inhibiting collars specially used to deal with super-powered people were not distributed. This is undoubtedly a dereliction of duty by him, the leader of this team. Thank you for your support. As the meeting neared its end, the expressionless Roach reiterated the ultimate purpose of their support, which was to ensure that no force, hidden or overt, would harbor any intention of opposing them. Therefore, any force or supervillain that dared to attack the East Ying base would face a violent response as a warning to others. Following Roach's order, Iron Man David immediately took control of the entire East Ying network. He would utilize ubiquitous cameras and massive data to analyze the various traces left by the attackers and their current hidden location. Seeing the blue light in Iron Man David's eyes constantly surging, he instantly entered work mode. After a moment of hesitation, Mariko and others suggested to Roach and Doom whether they should meet the hired superpowered individuals. Roach, somewhat curious about the abilities of this group of superpowered individuals, readily accepted the suggestion. Thus, Roach and Doom, clad in vibranium-powered armor, were led by Bucky and others to another location within the base. Soon after, in a spacious training ground, a superpowered task force consisting of 4 men and 1 woman appeared before Roach and the others. Everyone, temporarily stop your warm-up exercises. Gather around. As Bucky, looking nervous, stepped forward to greet them. These strange men and women of various appearances immediately dropped what they were doing. They quickly came to the edge of the training ground and formed a neat line. Captain, let me introduce you. This is Zheng Xian, Asian, codename, Weather Witch. She can control weather changes within a certain area and possesses special abilities like Thor, capable of controlling lightning. A young woman with a slender figure but a capable demeanor stared deeply at Roach, who was wearing powered armor. However, the other party did not speak, pursing her lips. Instead, she nodded her head, which was adorned with a delicate short haircut, towards Roach without any emotional fluctuations. The man wearing glasses is named Yamashita Tetsuya, formerly an ordinary fisherman from East Ying. He can create various types of firearms from basic metal materials out of thin air, and because his shooting accuracy is almost perfect, we all habitually call him Gun God. Bucky, speaking continuously, raised his mechanical arm and casually pointing to a young man at the end of the line who was wearing frameless glasses on his nose, and who always had a smile on his lips. The other party also squinted his eyes and sized up Roach and Doom. Afterwards, the man named Yamashita Tetsuya smiled warmly at the two. Immediately afterwards, Bucky's gaze turned to a middle-aged white man who looked slightly thin, but still tried to puff out his chest. As for this seemingly foolish guy, his name is Bob. He was once a subordinate of mine when I had not yet left Hydra, but he is not a fanatic of Hydra's beliefs, nor has he caused any slaughter. He simply regarded it as a place to go to work and earn extra money, so I absorbed him into this superpowered squad. In fact, After various genetic tests, no superpowers were found, but he does possess a very unique personal charisma, which is a lack of presence and indescribable luck. And the man standing next to Bob. Hi. Big guys, hello. I'm from Canada, you can call me Wade Wilson. Hey. Bucky, good afternoon. After yesterday's battle, I think I have successfully proven my worth. Shouldn't I get a raise in my weekly salary? I personally don't care, but Bob married a Mexican woman, you know, they also gave birth to a litter of squealing little Bobs. My God, can you imagine what a tragic scene it would be when Bob comes home from work? Also, I think we have too few people in this superpowered squad, should we increase the strength of the team? Trust me, I also have a long-distance cousin with explosive combat power, his name is also Wilson, just don't know which version you can find at that time. You shut up. Wade. Everyone, shut up. At this moment. Standing next to Wade Wilson. Another cold-looking young man suddenly extended two green blades composed entirely of energy from the back of his hand. The other party quickly turned around and forcibly placed the energy blade on Wade Wilson's neck. At the same time, Bucky, subconsciously raising his mechanical palm and slamming it on his forehead, also scolded the talkative guy. After Wade Wilson, with a bright smile on his face, obediently shut his mouth. Bucky, with a hint of helplessness in his expression, turned his head and complained to Roach, who had a very playful look in his eyes. Wade Wilson, the ceiling in the mercenary industry, said to be called Deadpool by others. I swear I never recruited him. He just appeared out of nowhere. He also tricked a training student out of a panacea from our training base, and successfully restored that disfigured appearance like the surface of the moon. Then, he chose to stay here and not leave. He also said that the Emperor personally guided him here to offer his loyalty, and Mariko actually believed his nonsense. For the Emperor. For Primarch Roach. For the Imperium of Man. At this moment, Deadpool, who had just returned to normal, suddenly raised an arm and stretched it forward. He first performed a Hydra salute towards Roach and others, and then shouted loudly with a solemn expression on his face. However, the next moment, Roach, taking a deep breath, suddenly drew the furnace heart from the waist of his powered armor. Without hesitation, he continuously pulled the trigger in Deadpool's direction. Chi. In an instant, scorching plasma balls spewing out of the muzzle completely enveloped Deadpool's body. And instantly turned the entire human body completely into constantly scattered ashes. If there are no unexpected circumstances, I think we can be temporarily quiet for a while. At this moment, Roach, slowly lowering the furnace heart, scanned the crowd in front of him expressionlessly. He said in a low voice. Then, Roach, who acted quite decisively, immediately gained the approving gazes from everyone. Even the Weather Witch, who seemed to have no emotional fluctuations, and the cold man named Saber, actually agreed with this method. Unfortunately, after the people who knew each other left the brightly lit training ground one after another. In the depths of that pile of human ashes accumulated on the metal floor. A piece of flesh, only the size of a needle tip, was rapidly growing and expanding. Glug glug. Perhaps before long, this piece of flesh would regrow into a brand new Deadpool. Chapter 451. Hero Team, The Four Heavenly Generals. A few hours later, after analyzing a massive amount of data, Iron Man David quickly presented the specific identities of the attackers to Roche and the others. To everyone's surprise, the four super-powered individuals leading the attack were not second or third-rate supervillains, and didn't even belong to any official organization. They were the first group on the Asian continent to try using online marketing after Tony Stark, Iron Man, inadvertently ushered in the Age of Heroes. They gathered a large number of fans through online marketing, and gradually transformed from internet celebrities into a special hero team of superheroes. This hero group, consisting of 3 men and 1 woman, was called the Four Heavenly Generals by countless online fans. Of course, the 4 of them did possess some kind of energy-based superpowers. Even the content marketed by their own team was far-fetchedly linked to the mythical legends of the heavenly Qilin beasts that had been circulating in Asia for thousands of years. The purpose was to increase the impressiveness and depth of their hero personas as much as possible. Female leader Azure Dragon, male member Battle Tiger, female member Black Tortoise, unknown gender member Phoenix. Energy-based superpowers related to mythical legends. Tisk, online marketing is really getting fancy now. Roche, with narrowed eyes, made a deadpan comment. His words were met with chuckles from the surrounding people. At this moment, Iron Man David, with blue light flashing in his eye sockets, slightly shook his metal head. It continued to speak to the surrounding people in a clear and organized manner. Judging from the timestamps of various data points, about a month ago, their marketing PR team suddenly announced to the public that the 4 Heavenly Generals had accidentally discovered a super-villain hiding its identity for countless years by sorting out secret historical documents, and vowed to eradicate this super-villain who was manipulating the lives of countless people. However, according to the comprehensive information I found by infiltrating their company's database, during that time, these super babies were facing an embarrassing situation where their cash flow was about to break due to excessive daily expenses. Therefore, in a moment of quick wit, they joined forces with PR planners to try to create a hero marketing story of good will eventually triumph over evil for their fan base. On the one hand, it was to quickly harvest fans and gather a large amount of wealth, and on the other hand, it was to gradually market this group of street heroes, who could only fight wits with armed robbers, into an international superhero team. My lord, this is the true situation of these attackers. And then what? At this moment, before Roche, who was slightly frowning, could ask any further questions, Bob, the middle-aged man who was listening with great interest, subconsciously asked Iron Man David in the distance. And then? There is no and then, because the story completely turned into an accident. After these, 4 Heavenly Generals posted their last team photo on the online platform, announcing their departure to the Asian heartland to confront the unknown super-villain. They completely disappeared from that day onwards. Until recently, they successfully raided our base. Combining the currently available information, either the super-villain they chose is actually us, but I am confident that we have not left any conspicuous traces for them to investigate in so many battles. Of course, there is also a possibility that they found a real super-villain as they wished, and were successfully brainwashed and controlled by the other party. And because the Dongying base has been gradually intensifying its infiltration activities in the Asian region recently, this super-villain of unknown identity used these guys as stones to test the waters, gently tapping us. As soon as Iron Man David's voice fell, Roche, who was tapping his 5 vibranium fingers up and down, took a deep breath. After thinking for a moment, he said to the people in front of him in a calm tone, whether they are brainwashed and mind-controlled by the enemy, or their heroic complex has gotten the better of them, the attack on the Dongying base and the resulting casualties are also established facts. Bucky, Doom, and Old John, you 3 will each lead a squad of Leviathan guards and members of the Superpower Task Force to capture the members of the 4 Heavenly Generals according to David's instructions. If you encounter fierce resistance or the other party's superpowers endanger many civilians, there is no need to keep them alive, just send them on their way. As for their leader, Azure Dragon, now that I'm here, I have to personally stretch my muscles. As Rock's order was issued, everyone at the Dongying base quickly became busy. Squads of Leviathan guards carrying chainsaw swords entered the cabin of the Thunderhawk transport aircraft one after another. And several automated servo robots, specially loaded with heavy logging guns and a large amount of ammunition, were also stuffed inside. At the same time, Iron Man David distributed the current hiding places of the other 3 members of the 4 Heavenly Generals, one by one, to the 3 high-spirited combat teams. Doom and his stormtrooper squad went to deal with Battle Tiger. The opponent chose to hide in a crowded love hotel, requiring a quick battle. Bucky led the Weather Witch Jung Xian. And Bob and Yamashita Tetsuya also went to pursue the Black Tortoise, who was constantly moving. As for the Phoenix, whose gender was unknown, Old John, wearing a set of heavy armor and holding a South Pole vibranium power sword, personally led that cold man named Sabretooth to deal with him. As for Roche, wearing vibranium power armor, he was specifically responsible for the leader of the 4 Heavenly Generals, Azure Dragon. If problems arise in other teams, Roche will also take on the task of providing rapid support. Buzz buzz buzz. Soon after, accompanied by 2 Thunderhawk transport aircraft and an ordinary helicopter gradually rising into the air, the combat squads of the Dongying base dispersed, quickly rushed towards the predetermined target, and the fully armed Roche slowly put on his vibranium helmet, completely turning himself into an indestructible metal lump. Then, he quickly stepped into the Thunderhawk transport aircraft driven by Iron Man David, leading the last Leviathan guard to fly to the Hakone mountain area, 90 kilometers away from the Tokyo area. And according to the clues found by Iron Man David through data analysis, the leader of the 4 heavenly generals, Azure Dragon, was hiding in the remote mountains. And due to some unknown reasons, after these people failed to raid the Dongying base, they did not choose to leave the island of Dongying as soon as possible. Instead, they were a group of beasts like frightened birds, hiding in unfamiliar areas that they thought were very safe. If Iron Man David's previous guess was correct, then, does the occurrence of this situation mean that these internet celebrity heroes have accidentally regained their sanity? At this moment, Roche, breathing long and steadily, sat on the seat in the cabin and pondered silently. Thank you for your support. Brothers, what I thought was the end was actually just the beginning. Not only did chills come with a high fever, but the body temperature just measured was around 39 degrees, and the position of the kidney was as painful as being hammered. Even a tough guy like me, who can tolerate pain, is crying. Now the whole person is dizzy and has no energy at all. After gritting my teeth and writing this chapter, I really can't hold on anymore. Today's update may be just one chapter. If the fever subsides in the afternoon, I will try to get up and make up for it. If I'm still half dead, then today's update is gone. Tomorrow's update still depends on the recovery situation afterwards. I'm sorry, readers and friends, I hope everyone can avoid getting infected. It's really not as simple as a cold and fever. May the benevolent Father Nurgle and the Emperor jointly bless everyone to stay away from COVID. Rumble, accompanied by the dull thud of magnetic boots deeply impacting the hard ground, and a large amount of damp soil spraying everywhere. Rorschach, clad in vibranium-powered armor, leapt from the transport aircraft's cabin like a solid meteorite. He gripped the blood scythe wreathed in green light with both hands, his gaze rapidly sweeping across the surrounding mountain forest environment through the helmet's visor. After failing to find anything, the imposing Rorschach abruptly raised a vibranium hand and waved it at the Thunderhawk transport aircraft hovering overhead. Thump thump thump. The next second, 5 Mandroid guard, each topped with a metallic skull, shaped like a flexible serpent, and gripping several chainswords in their slightly trembling mechanical tentacles, crashed heavily to the ground like soaring artillery shells. Immediately afterward, Iron Man David, still piloting the Thunderhawk transport, took control of the Mandroid guard. It quickly reported to Rorschach, who was striding forward in his vibranium-powered armor. My lord, approximately 5 kilometers away, there were traces of brief smoke plumes not long ago. Excluding hikers and civilians who live by hunting and gathering in the mountains, it is highly likely to be our mission target. David, understood. Have the Mandroid guard lead the way. If you find any trace of the target, report to me immediately. At this moment, Rorschach, without turning his head, commanded the Mandroid guard controlled by Iron Man David. As you command, my lord. Iron Man David's mechanical voice disappeared. The 5 Mandroid guard almost simultaneously shook their metallic skulls. After each choosing a direction to advance, they rapidly began their search of the dimly lit mountain forest interior, like agile jungle beasts. Meanwhile, Rorschach, driving the vibranium-powered armor, unhesitatingly activated his special talent, Invisible Man, completely erasing any sound or presence generated by himself and the armor as they moved. My lord, the location where the target made a fire to eat and left remains is 2 kilometers ahead. Not long after, a mechanical voice from Iron Man David echoed softly in Rorschach's ears. Reacting swiftly, Rorschach immediately accelerated his pace in the vibranium-powered armor. He bounded and leapt like a metal ape into the depths of the increasingly complex mountain forest. Thump. By the time Rorschach quickly arrived at the location discovered by Iron Man David, the 5 fully armed Mandroid guard had already arrived ahead of time. They were gathered around a smoldering fire, emitting wisps of smoke, constantly scanning and surveying. and just below a rugged rock face not far from the fire. A spring of mountain water, as deep and rippling as a jade pool, was receiving the gurgling stream from higher up in the mountain forest. My lord, several small wild animal skeletons that have been gnawed clean and wild fruit dregs were found near the fire. The target did not make any plans before fleeing into the mountain area, so continuing to track the target is not difficult. Tisk, David, have you heard the saying, the darkest place is under the lamp? I think that a human born on the Asian continent, even if they cannot obtain the specific origin of this saying due to various language limitations, their hometown will definitely have a similar saying. At this moment, Rorschach, who had been focusing his gaze on the mountain spring from the moment he entered the scene, suddenly spoke. Moreover, even if a superhero who was originally an internet celebrity deliberately learns and changes their behavior habits, they will inevitably leave some weaknesses that they would subconsciously overlook. If my keen sense of smell is not mistaken, the target did not choose to flee this place in a panic. After all, that pungent smell, mixed with a lot of sweat and blood, and even some residual perfume, leads directly to the edge of the mountain spring and disappears inside. This is nothing less than a guiding light for me. Before Rorschach finished speaking, the 5-mandroid guard, personally controlled by Iron Man David, rapidly pounced towards the location of the mountain spring. The roar of the chainswords instantly echoed throughout the surrounding dimly lit mountain forest. Rumble, however, accompanied by a series of explosive spring water surges erupting from the depths of the mountain spring. Ha! A tall woman with slightly dark skin and covered in blue energy patterns resembling dragon scales, holding a 2-meter-long azure dragon 9-section staff, leapt into the air like a soaring bird. Chi. Immediately afterward, crescent blade energies entirely composed of blue energy, following the rapid dance of the azure dragon 9-section staff, swiftly and heavily bombarded the surrounding mandroid guard. Thump. At this moment, these mandroid guard, who were filled with various defensive resistances to pure physical attacks, were violently tumbling backward like soccer balls. Subsequently, Rorschach, gripping the Forgeheart in his palm, quickly noticed through the helmet visor that wisps of blue energy were emerging between the metal serpent bodies of each mandroid guard, rapidly spreading throughout their bodies, and firmly binding the mandroid guard in place, making them unable to move. Although your debut just now was full of nonsensical stage presence, the superpower you control is a bit interesting, but, what a pity. At this moment, Rorschach, who had quietly released the Forgeheart and simultaneously deactivated the Invisible Man special talent, completely revealed his tall metal form within the sight range of Captain Azure Dragon. However, besides seeing a shocked expression suddenly appear on the other party's face, Rorschach, clad in vibranium-powered armor, also immediately received the energy bombardment of several crescent blade energies. Unfortunately, the superpowers and weapons that can break through the vibranium armor's outer shell do exist, but they are not in the hands of this tall, dark-skinned woman. Moreover, thanks to the extremely powerful energy resistance of the vibranium armor's outer shell, Rorschach did not even use much strength to easily break free from those blue energies that continued to spread throughout his body. In an instant, Rorschach, without any emotional fluctuations, drove the vibranium-powered armor to slightly lower its posture. One of his vibranium hands gripped the green glowing blood scythe, while the other vibranium hand suddenly removed the helmet from his head. The next second, just as a delighted expression mixed with surprise appeared on Captain Azure Dragon's face, Rorschach, rich in combat experience, did not give the other party a chance to continue activating the crescent blade energies. He unhesitatingly used Shadow Step. His entire person instantly transformed into a dark phantom, heavily landing behind the other party. Almost at the same time, Rorschach, whose magnetic boots had just landed, did not wield the blood scythe to slash and kill the panicked Captain Azure Dragon. Instead, he raised both of his thick arms covered by the vibranium armor's outer shell, and embraced the other party's slender and tall body like a hunting bear. Then, he suddenly opened his bloody maw, revealing several pairs of snow-white fangs gleaming with cold light, and forcibly bit and devoured the other party's vulnerable flesh at the neck. Thank you all for your support. My whole body is starting to convulse, bringing back memories of having a 40-degree fever back then. I've already started using physical cooling methods. I feel like compound paracetamol and amantadine hydrochloride tablets aren't working very well, and I can't take ibuprofen sustained-release capsules at the same time. I feel like I'm about to die. I hate those Nurgle cultists and Tzeentch cyber armies even more at this moment. And the Imperium of Man, which decided to abandon the vast majority of civilians. I also thank the Chaos Warp for giving my whole family a Christmas present. I only had one vaccine shot because of an allergic reaction. I don't know if I can last long enough to get to the hospital later, although the situation at the hospital isn't much better now. Roche was not plunged into the terrifying throes of bloodlust. He merely wanted to test the specific function of the gene-detecting nerves. Additionally, he wanted to ascertain whether the misfortune that befell these influencer heroes aligned with Iron Man David's previous conjecture. However, Roche simply omitted the capture and subsequent interrogation processes. Glug. At this moment, streams of pungent, scalding, crimson blood, mixed with shattered flesh, surged into Rock's throat. Accompanying the gradual activation of the gene-detecting nerves, countless fragmented memories slowly surfaced in Rock's mind, flowing back and forth like a ceaseless river. Hee, everyone, come and play. A young, dark-skinned girl led a group of raggedly dressed children through the scorching sunlight of a tropical rainforest. This seemed to be a memory fragment from Azure Dragon's childhood. What's the matter with your performance? If there's no improvement next month, all of you can go back to your small villages. Open Black Lens Bracket Recommendation. The app used for changing sources to chase books is really easy to use. Download it here and everyone can try it quickly. Close Black Lens Bracket. A middle-aged man with an unkind expression loudly rebuked four men and women in different attire. One of them, a robust old man with a grizzled beard, wanted to step forward and argue with the man. However, the team leader, Azure Dragon, with a grave expression, abruptly raised a hand to stop him. This should be Azure Dragon's most profound memory fragment when her influencer career encountered a bottleneck. Azure Dragon, the being we seek, is an ancient legend that has circulated for at least several hundred years. If it doesn't exist, then all is well, but what if? The robust old man named Zanyu said earnestly in the memory. Zanyu, we have no way back now. Either we rush into the boss's office right now, slap him to death, and become the villains we once despised, or we gamble everything and hope that the slumbering Kylan divine beast will bless us, the four heavenly generals. The slightly dark-skinned Azure Dragon took a deep breath. She blinked her eyes, gazing at the three people around her, and said. This was a memory fragment of Azure Dragon and the others about to embark on a path of no return. Subsequently, more broken memory fragments, which couldn't even be called scenes, surfaced one by one in Rock's mind. Just then, Roche, who was watching the fragmented memories like movie footage, suddenly halted the rapid flow of countless broken memory fragments. He quickly relied on his consciousness to rewind backward in large increments. Finally, on the edge of a memory fragment that no one paid attention to, he successfully extracted a blurred image. It was the back view of a tall man with shoulder-length hair. Between the man's two muscular arms, he seemed to be wearing 10 metal rings that constantly emitted purple energy. The 10 rings. Finally know who's behind this. At that moment, Roche, who slowly opened his eyes, indeed unearthed something from the depths of Azure Dragon's memory. He casually released the other party's slender body with shattered bones. And threw down the tall woman who was almost on her last breath in his arms. Chi. However, just as Roche propelled the vibranium-powered armor, wanting to turn around and notify Iron Man David, the woman lying on the ground with even fainter breaths, actually condensed a massive Azure Dragon phantom, entirely composed of blue energy, from her scarred body. What the hell? The quick-reacting Roche immediately propelled the vibranium-powered armor backward. At the same time, he drew the heart of the forge from his waist and pulled the trigger towards the massive Azure Dragon phantom above. Puff puff puff. Instantly, countless plasma spheres continuously gathered and exploded in midair, rapidly spreading into a plasma tide. Unfortunately, this had no effect on the massive Azure Dragon phantom, which was an energy body in the first place. Instead, it made the other party's massive size even larger. David, bring the Thunderhawk transport back here. Roche, with a solemn expression, instructed the AIM mechs to retrieve the vibranium helmet from the ground. He issued other orders to Iron Man David while doing so. However, just as Roche thought that the enormous Azure Dragon Phantom was about to self-destruct or launch an attack. Buzz buzz buzz. The pinky finger on his left hand, heavily encased in vibranium armor, suddenly erupted with an unbearable heat and a pulse like a heartbeat. This is the protective magic item Master Ji gave me. Roche widened his eyes subconsciously. Before he could ponder why the protective magic item would produce such unfamiliar changes. Chi chi chi. Instantly, strands of blue energy, with flickering flames, suddenly burst outward from between Rock's vibranium palm. Azure Dragon Divine Power. This is not a superpower generated by the other party themselves. The myths and legends about the 4 heavenly generals are actually true. As his eyes slightly closed, Roche, who quickly understood part of the origin of the blue energy, couldn't help but take a deep breath. At this moment, he suddenly shifted his gaze. Gazing at the team leader, Azure Dragon, who was already in a dying state not far away. Subsequently, the expressionless Roche reached out and took out a bottle of panacea capsules from the bottom of his power backpack. He immediately propelled the vibranium-powered armor towards the other party. David, notify the other combat teams. The enemy will have a powerful counterattack force when they are on the verge of death. Let them change the mission strategy. Focus on rendering the enemy members completely unconscious. As long as the body and brain are intact, broken arms and legs don't matter. My lord, did you accidentally acquire a new special ability just now? It's not clear yet, which is why I need to keep these 4 heavenly generals to ask questions. Understood, my lord, the order has been resent. Dash 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 dash. This was the first time Roche had obtained a special energy completely controlled by himself from the native world. Although he had not yet figured out the specific origin of this power. As long as the Emperor, who constantly watched him, did not produce an stress reaction, then it meant that this power could be used with confidence. At this moment, the woman, whose injuries had been mostly healed by the panacea, was casually picked up by Roche. After the Thunderhawk transport slowly descended and the cabin door reopened, Iron Man David, holding a power-dampening collar, took over the other party, who had not yet awakened from her coma. And Roche, propelling the vibranium-powered armor, sat in the cabin seat. He would occasionally lower his head and gaze at a vibranium palm. Strands of blue energy called Azure Dragon Divine Power circulated back and forth with his thoughts from time to time. According to the vague information revealed by the Azure Dragon Divine Power itself, when the 4 different divine powers held by the 4 heavenly generals were combined into one, an ancient being called the Kylan Divine Beast would completely awaken from the void and quickly become a powerful aid to the summoner. Kylan Divine Beast, after the Thunderhawk transport carrying Luo Sha returned to the Dongying base. The first to return was naturally Doom and his stormtrooper squad. In fact, if Iron Man David hadn't sent the order at a speed far exceeding ordinary communication methods, then Zanyu, one of the 4 heavenly kings, would have become a broken corpse long ago. Soon after, Bucky and Old John also brought their respective mission targets back alive. Subsequently, Luo Sha first demonstrated the Azure Dragon Divine Power to everyone, and then explained the specific reasons for keeping them alive. Everyone expressed their understanding of this. After all, this is also a way to obtain special abilities, worth a try. So, with Doom's help and cooperation, Luo Sha launched a continuous offensive against the other 3 of the 4 heavenly kings. And at the special moment when each person was almost dying, the remaining 3 divine powers, named Black Tortoise Divine Power, Vermilion Bird Divine Power, and White Tiger Divine Power, were also absorbed by the protective magic item and poured into Luo Sha's body. During this period, Luo Sha once tried to let Doom and others also acquire one of the divine powers. But except for Luo Sha, who possessed a protective magic item and could approach those manifested divine powers, anyone who dared to approach would suffer a terrifying counterattack from the divine power phantom. From this, Luo Sha also determined that he himself was not a magical genius hidden for many years or a mysterious physique. It was the mysterious protective magic item that brought him a surprise. Perhaps he needs to go to Kamar Taj again sometime and ask the Ancient One to help him figure it out. Buzz buzz buzz. As the four kinds of colorful divine power gradually converged, Luo Sha could clearly sense that he could immediately summon an extremely powerful celestial Kirin beast out of thin air from an unknown void. However, he also felt very clearly. Once the summon is successful, it will take a very long time for the consumed divine power to recover. So, Luo Sha is currently unable to summon it to see the effect. He can only regard the celestial Kirin beast as a combat trump card. Maybe I can wait until I perform a support mission to summon it and see, but I don't know how much the local abilities can exert when they go to the Warhammer universe, but since psionic energy can be used in the local world, then similar energies can also play some role in another place, right? At this moment, Luo Sha, who slowly opened his eyes, thought silently. Dash 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 dash. After the problem of divine power was temporarily put to rest, Luo Sha then asked Iron Man David to use the panacea to heal the scarred four heavenly kings. And once again airlifted a Hydra brainwashing device. After brainwashing the four, they were absorbed into the team. These four guys are not bad people in the true sense. But instead of letting them die completely, it's better to stay in the Dongying base and shine, and atone for the dead soldiers forever. Subsequently, the four heavenly kings, who had completely dedicated their loyalty, also told Luo Sha and others about some of the memories they still vaguely retained. Originally, their tracking of the ancient villains was going smoothly, and successfully had a fierce conflict with a secret organization called the Ten Rings Gang. However, just as they were using their divine power to kill in all directions, a terrifying figure made them completely lose any consciousness with just one encounter. And when everyone regained consciousness again, they vaguely felt that they had just attacked a military base-like place, which is where the Dongying base is located. The panicked crowd didn't even have time to discuss countermeasures, and fled in the direction that could bring a sense of security according to their respective habits. As for what happened later, Luo Sha and others also knew. At this moment, after listening to all the narratives of the four heavenly kings, after a little contemplation, everyone slowly began to discuss. There are very few deeds of the Ten Rings Gang circulating on the internet. Basically they are all legends based on speculation, and according to the evidence pieced together from limited information, their scope of activities is mainly in Asia. It seems that my previous speculation was correct. The Dongying base's infiltration activities in Asia have attracted the attention of the local snakes. Iron Man David, with blue light flickering in his eyes, shook his metal head slightly. It said to the people around, David, notify Redditus, mobilize 1/3 of the Intelligent Control Legion to the Dongying base, and also transfer 20 heavy servitors, and prepare the weapons and equipment in advance according to a medium-scale war, and also inform Natasha, who is far away in Europe. If there is not much danger there, transfer my stormtrooper squad back as well. At this time, Luo Sha, squinting his eyes, pondered for a moment. He unhesitatingly and clearly ordered Iron Man David, I personally think that since others have already provoked us, there is no need to be restrained. Strike first to avoid 100 punches. Everyone, prepare for the next battle as soon as possible. As Luo Sha's words echoed in the conference room, the expressions of the people around gradually changed from indifferent to solemn. Subsequently, everyone got up and left in turn, going to do their own pre-war preparations. And Zhang Xian, codenamed Weather Witch, unexpectedly became the last person to leave the conference room. It's just that before the other party stepped out of the door, she seemed to turn her head again and stare at Luo Sha, who was expressionless. Dash 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 dash. Dong dong dong. Luo Sha drove the vibranium power armor and walked in the metal passage of the Dongying base. He was going to his private lounge. Not long after, Luo Sha, who had just arrived at the door of the lounge, suddenly stagnated any movement on his huge body. He twitched his nose slightly. Then, Luo Sha, with an expressionless face, still slowly raised a vibranium palm and gently opened the door of the lounge. If you are here to assassinate me, my personal suggestion is that you should at least steal some of the melee weapons I brought with me. Ordinary things are difficult to cause much damage to me. Luo Sha, squinting his eyes, slowly drove the vibranium power armor. He fearlessly stepped into the dimly lit interior of the lounge. At this moment, in a dark corner of the lounge, Zheng Xian, with her arms folded, stood there with an indifferent expression. She stared straight at Luo Sha's direction with a pair of emotionless eyes, and said expressionlessly, "I'm not some second-rate assassin, I'm just a mouthpiece." In the next second, as she slowly raised a slender palm, strands of gray-white, humid mist appeared out of thin air on the metal floor of the lounge. Immediately afterwards, a vague human figure completely condensed from water mist appeared in front of the unmoving Luo Sha. "Hello, respected Mr. Luo Sha. Please allow me to introduce myself. I am Zheng Xian, Director of the Asian Continent Shield." Chapter 455, The Team's Strategic Partners. Luo Sha knew who Zheng Xian was. In fact, when he first saw Bucky's superpower task force, after the unexpected addition of Weather Witch and Sabretooth, two team members with very familiar mental outlooks, Luo Sha vaguely understood that S.H.I.E.L.D. had noticed his team. At this moment, Luo Sha, with no emotional fluctuations on his face, first waved his vibranium palm at Director Zheng Xian, as the owner of the place, indicating that he should feel free. Then, he slowly lowered his hand and gently tapped the vibranium helmet hanging on his waist. "Mr. Luo Sha, you. Don't rush, wait a moment." Director Zheng Xian, completely composed of water mist, seemed to hesitate slightly. He was just about to continue speaking, but he was abruptly interrupted by Luo Sha, who had an indifferent expression. So, the three people in the lounge temporarily fell into a very strange state of silence. About 5 minutes later, a team of menacing ally guards dragged several unconscious human figures and quickly arrived outside the lounge door. At a glance, those unconscious figures were the cold-blooded Sabretooth, as well as an ordinary officer of a ninja unit with an unfamiliar appearance. And also Lin Yu, the bespectacled man who Luo Sha was most familiar with in the past. David had long noticed the inconsistency between Lin Yu's behavior and identity, but considering Ant's face, keeping him around to amuse the old lady was also a good thing. Perhaps there are still secret agents inserted by you in the Dongying base, but it doesn't matter, they will soon offer their loyalty to me. Driving the vibranium power armor, Luo Sha walked towards the bed in the lounge without looking back. He ignored the hint of anger in Weather Witch Zheng Xian's eyes, and the faint wry smile that slowly appeared on Director Zheng Xian's misty figure. "Mr. Luo Sha, please forgive S.H.I.E.L.D.'s previous abruptness. We are not mortal enemies. Their true identities are not spies, but helpers providing protection for part of your base." The cunning Director Zheng Xian preemptively showed weakness to Luo Sha. And Luo Sha did not immediately kill Weather Witch and her little partners. Then naturally he had the mind to talk. So, the two people who knew each other well first asked Weather Witch Zheng Xian, who was standing aside, to temporarily leave the lounge. Then, they began to talk from shallow to deep. First of all, S.H.I.E.L.D. Director Zheng Xian stated that they were paying attention to Luo Sha not because of the terrifying name of Terra Star Realm Legion, or anything like that. In fact, they had already discovered that Luo Sha was not the kind of person who indiscriminately killed innocent people, and his attitude towards civilians was also quite good. And in order to truly gain Luo Sha's trust, Zheng Xian also shared the ancient prophecy left by Zhang Heng, the founder of S.H.I.E.L.D., with Luo Sha. Finally, the two people who temporarily ended their conversation successfully reached a certain cooperation intention. Any actions of Luo Sha's team on the Asian continent will not be subject to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s supervision. They can even obtain a certain degree of combat support. However, Luo Sha's team is also not allowed to slaughter civilians at will, causing large-scale economic losses. As for Weather Witch Zheng Xian and others, they can continue to stay at the Dongying base. It's just that their identities have changed from their own people in the team. It became an expatriate from S.H.I.E.L.D., and was completely removed from the core circle. Subsequently, Luo Sha and Zheng Xian's topic fell on the handling of the Ten Rings gang. This is also why the S.H.I.E.L.D. director had to reveal his identity in advance when he learned that Luo Sha was planning to launch a war. The ancient Ten Rings gang has always been one of S.H.I.E.L.D's important enemies from ancient times to the present. Their leader, Wenwu, is a powerful ancient man who has experienced countless dynastic changes. Even the change of some dynasties was personally promoted by Wenwu. To some extent, S.H.I.E.L.D. actually has no objection to Luo Sha wanting to destroy the Ten Rings gang, and may even raise both hands in approval. They are afraid that Luo Sha will accidentally expand the scale of the war and trigger a series of chain reactions. Not long after, Weather Witch Zheng Xian, with a cold expression, was called back to the interior of the lounge. She was temporarily assigned a difficult task. That is to set off immediately to the Central Asian region where the Ten Rings gang is located. Zheng Xian needs to rely on her superpower to control the weather. To gradually plunge the local area into a certain degree of natural disaster. As a result, S.H.I.E.L.D. will take the opportunity to send a large number of people to evacuate most of the civilians in the area in the name of the United Nations. And the Ten Rings gang, no matter for what reason, will definitely not give up its territory. So, as long as the time is right, it will be Luo Sha's scope of work. Chi. After Zheng Xian, in the form of water mist, respectfully dissipated. Luo Sha, squinting his eyes, stared at Zheng Xian in front of him and suddenly asked. Tisk, your two names are almost exactly the same, is Zheng Xian your father? Adoptive father, and infiltrating your base was also an action I voluntarily participated in, so don't try to alienate our relationship in this way. Even though Zheng Xian is unwilling to have too much interaction with Luo Sha at the moment. But she still said solemnly with an expressionless face. When do I start performing the natural disaster mission? I may still need Sabretooth's help. Now, you can take Sabretooth to find David, he will arrange equipment and transport planes for you. Don't worry, facing a suitable common goal, even if you are a heretic, I will prepare weapons and ammunition for you. When you leave, please remember to close the door, thank you. At this moment, Luo Sha, who had slightly closed his eyes, said without raising his head. And Zheng Xian, with an expressionless face, took a deep look at Luo Sha. She immediately turned around and walked out of the lounge. While closing the door, she also received the cold-blooded Sabretooth in a state of unconsciousness from the mechanical tentacles of several ally guards. Wipe. Not long after, Luo Sha, who was resting with his eyes closed, once again heard a rustling sound outside the door of the lounge. Frowning slightly, he hesitated a little. He still drove the vibranium power armor and slowly got up to go forward. However, when he pulled open the door, he saw Deadpool Wade, wearing a red combat suit, lying in the metal embrace of several ally guards, waving his hands at him non-stop. Hello, dear Primarch Lord. Dong. Luo Sha, with an expressionless face, immediately slammed the door of the lounge shut. The power he used was so great that even the metal door frame was somewhat distorted and deformed. At the same time, Deadpool Wade couldn't help but look at the metal skull head of an ally guard next to him. Then, he smacked his lips, shook his head and sighed. It seems that our Primarch Lord doesn't like me very much. Creak. Deadpool Wade's words had just fallen. The distorted and deformed lounge door was actually pulled open again by someone, and it also made an extremely harsh rubbing sound. Immediately afterwards, Luo Sha, clutching the furnace heart tightly in his palm, rushed out of the room, driving the vibranium power armor with a fierce aura. Chi. Thank you all for your support. A magnetic boot heavily landed in the loose, scorching desert. It emitted a rustling sound of sand grains colliding. At this moment, Luo Sha, wearing a vibranium helmet, casually lifted the desert camouflage cloak covering his power armor. Through his visor, he gazed at the long, winding lines of civilians evacuating in the far distance, as well as the massive mountain city built against the mountainside. Lord Luo Sha, the Intellitron Legion has been fully deployed and is currently digging underground towards the front lines. According to the message from S.H.I.E.L.D., their team needs about 6 more hours to evacuate the civilians. I'm afraid it won't be finished before dark. Accompanied by the subtle sound of the dark green cloak fluttering slightly. Doom walked behind Luo Sha and reported to him. This is something everyone had anticipated. Just let the Intellitron Legion continue digging the underground tunnels. By the way, Doom, how many whirlwind missile launchers did David send over? Luo Sha slightly shook his vibranium helmet. He said without turning his head. About 100 or so. However, the spare ammunition can only fire about 3 to 5 times. Doom lowered his head slightly, calculated for a moment, and replied without hesitation. Luo Sha nodded slightly. After pondering for a moment, he said with clear logic. After the attack begins, the Intellitron Legion will launch a surprise attack from underground. 20 heavy combat servitors will cooperate with the whirlwind missile launchers to attract the enemy's firepower from the front lines. You and I will lead the stormtrooper squad to launch a stealth attack from the flanks, attempting to decapitate their leader, Wenwu. According to the information S.H.I.E.L.D. provided me, Wenwu himself is proficient in close combat and also controls a certain degree of magic or witchcraft. The specific abilities of his 10 rings are unknown, but their basic function is to be indestructible. My vibranium power armor might be able to completely block it, but your Doombot armor might not be able to withstand a single blow, so be careful. If necessary, let the Leviathan mechs go up and take the hit. Understood, Lord Luo Sha. As for the witchcraft or magic he controls, we don't need to worry. Before coming here, I deliberately brought a magic dampening bracelet. Although I can only participate in combat with the power armor after activating it, the opponent may not be able to adapt. At this moment, Doom said to Luo Sha beside him with full confidence. Luo Sha slightly turned his vibranium helmet. He glanced at Doom through his visor, but didn't say anything. If the master of the 10 Rings gang, Wenwu, was such an easy guy to deal with, how could S.H.I.E.L.D. have been entangled with him for so many years? Dash 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 dash. As night slowly descended, the diurnal temperature difference in the desert region underwent a huge change. Just above the mountain city where the 10 Rings gang was located, layers of heavy dark clouds gradually gathered, carrying a torrent of heavy rain that poured down. And soon, a biting cold wind formed shards of crystal ice, like sharp swords, heavily smashing down on everything on the ground. At the same time, behind a desert hill not far from the mountain city. Whiz whiz whiz. Accompanied by the striking trajectories of whirlwind missiles, like a meteor shower, suddenly piercing through the dark night sky. 20 heavy combat servitors, carrying laser guns and storm bolters, quickly rushed out of their pre-hidden location. They began to launch continuous attacks and destruction on the various roads of the mountain city. As a result, many of the 10 Rings gang warriors who originally wanted to hide inside buildings to temporarily avoid the harsh weather had to find ways to launch counterattacks against those most conspicuous enemies. Rumble rumble. In the next second, parts of the ancient buildings in the mountain city were instantly engulfed by the explosive flames of countless whirlwind missiles. A large number of rooms either burst into flames or directly collapsed. If there hadn't already been so few civilians inside, this bombing alone would have taken countless lives. Buzz buzz buzz. At this moment, some of the more perceptive 10 Rings gang warriors accidentally discovered that the ground around them began to shake and collapse. Enemy. However, before these people could issue more warnings to their companions, Leviathan mechs, wielding mechanical tentacles and chainswords, suddenly leapt up from underground like mechanical assassins. Immediately, they launched a continuous massacre against the surrounding flesh and blood. For ordinary civilians, the warriors of the 10 Rings gang might be an insurmountable and terrifying mountain. But for the Intellitron Legion, which had no emotions or rationality, the combat quality of these guys might not even be as high as the Hydra soldiers of the past. Open black lens bracket note. Speaking of which, the app used for reading aloud and listening to books is the best. It's called Wanyuan app. Install the latest version. Close black lens bracket. Soon after, the external defense system of the mountain city was basically completely breached by the surprise attacking Leviathan mechs and heavy combat servitors. In fact, this level of smoothness was somewhat beyond Luo Sha's expectations. But he still drove his vibranium power armor, carrying the blood scythe surrounded by green light. Leading Doom and his stormtrooper squad, he infiltrated deep into the mountain city. My lord, the Leviathan mechs on the front lines are beginning to suffer some losses. There are some male warriors wearing black robes who can use the burning of their own lives as a price to give their fists and feet indestructible destructive power. Even if they can be easily killed by just a laser beam, they are not stingy about exchanging their lives for lives. At this moment, Luo Sha suddenly heard the situation report from Iron Man David in his ear. It seemed that with the complete collapse of the peripheral forces of the Ten Rings gang, the true foundation that had existed for thousands of years had just begun to reveal itself to the outside world. So, Luo Sha unhesitatingly shared this important information with the others in the decapitation squad. However, just as everyone was planning to continue sneaking forward, accompanied by a rustling sound of subtle footsteps. One by one, lithe figures wearing local black robes and holding sharp scimitars quickly passed through the dark shadows of those ancient buildings, densely surrounding the decapitation squad. Since the infiltration has been discovered, let's change it to a frontal assault. Luo Sha, carrying the blood scythe in one hand, said to Doom and the others without hesitation. Then, he drove his vibranium power armor and took the lead in launching a terrifying charge towards the nearest black-robed warriors. Rumble. Even if these black-robed warriors in front of him already belonged to one of the elite forces of the Ten Rings gang. But for Luo Sha, who was unilaterally crushing them in terms of both equipment and power, they still weren't qualified. Whiz whiz whiz. The blood scythe, with its sharp blade and green light swirling around it, moved back and forth. In an instant, including the bricks and stones of some ancient buildings. More than a dozen black-robed warriors completely became souls under Luo Sha's scythe. At the same time, Dr. Doom's dark green cloak, draped over his power armor, stirred without wind, rustling loudly. One of his ceramite steel hands waved casually. Hellfire summoned by sorcery, carrying a strong scent of sulfur, completely ignited a group of black-robed warriors nearby. Meanwhile, Doom's other ceramite steel hand also quickly raised, several fingertips straightened. A series of impact beams, powered by the arc reactor, continuously scattered towards the enemy's position. At the same time, the roar of bolters from the stormtrooper squad hardly stopped for a moment. Boom boom boom. However, even in the face of such tragically heavy casualties, the surrounding black-robed warriors showed no sign of retreat, as they uttered unknown sounds that resembled both prayer scriptures and battle cries. Every time their fists and feet swung, a tremendous sonic boom erupted. Bang! A stormtrooper wearing assisted power armor was quickly approached by a black-robed warrior while changing bolter ammunition. Before the stormtrooper could raise his hand to counterattack, the opponent's fist, carrying a fierce wind, slammed heavily into the ceramite steel chestplate. Instantly, the stormtrooper, whose size and weight far exceeded ordinary vehicles, flew backward. A clearly visible, massive fist mark appeared on the ceramite steel shell. However, this type of attack would cause some trouble for the stormtroopers. But for Luo Sha, who was wearing vibranium power armor, it became a powerful method of depleting the enemy's lives. As the blood scythe danced back and forth in his palm, Luo Sha didn't even bother to defend much against some black-robed warriors who deliberately approached him. And as the opponent unleashed terrifying punches and kicks, the powerful defense and shock counterattack from the vibranium armor plunged the attacker into a state of broken bones and tendons. Calmly, Luo Sha drove the vibranium power armor. He either pulled back and charged, or raised his foot to stomp. Soon, he eliminated most of the black-robed warriors in front of him. He quickly turned his gaze, and immediately launched a charge towards the others who were being besieged. Soon after, Luo Sha and Doom once again joined forces. They gathered the endless stream of black-robed warriors as much as possible and carried out a final massacre and cleanup. Check equipment status, we continue forward. The blood scythe in his palm trembled slightly, shaking off the remaining blood. Luo Sha turned to gaze at the constant gunfire and explosions in other parts of the mountain city. He spoke in a deep voice to the people behind him without hesitation. Subsequently, Luo Sha led Doom and the others along the narrow roads between the buildings, continuing to run towards the central location of the mountain city. Dash 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 dash. Strangely enough, since encountering those black-robed warriors with high attack and low defense, the decapitation squad led by Luo Sha had not encountered any further resistance. Until they stepped on the ice shards all over the ground. They smoothly arrived at the periphery of the ancient palace in the mountain city, which seemed to be the command center, and no other enemies appeared in front of them. I feel like something is wrong, everyone be vigilant. At this moment, Luo Sha, gripping the blood scythe tightly in his palm, stared at the ancient palace without any signs of lights through his visor. He subconsciously instructed the surrounding people in a low voice. Squeak. Just at this moment, accompanied by a harsh metallic rubbing sound, the originally closed metal gate of the ancient palace suddenly opened inward. Immediately afterward, torches lit against the wind completely illuminated the internal space of the ancient palace, reflecting some of the interior structure and decoration. However, even after such an astonishing change, there were still no signs of any enemies appearing on the surrounding buildings or roads. Empty city ploy. At this moment, Luo Sha's eyebrows, hidden inside the vibranium helmet, furrowed slightly. He immediately waved his hand, instructing the stormtrooper squad to disperse around and carefully ambush near the entrance of the ancient palace. Then, Luo Sha and Doom next to him looked at each other through their visors. These two bold and skilled guys actually drove their power armor without hesitation, and walked straight into the interior of the ancient palace. Dong dong dong. The heavy sound of magnetic boots echoed continuously inside the empty ancient palace. And Luo Sha and Doom, who had just entered, saw it almost at a glance. The tall figure wearing a simple gray robe and standing with his hands behind his back at the end of the palace. When I led the 10 Rings followers and personally built this mountain city, your world was still in a chaotic state of slaughter. At this moment, the tall figure with long hair draped over his shoulders slowly turned around. The other party revealed a bronze face to Luo Sha and Doom, with an extremely firm expression and a touch of vicissitudes in his eyes. The master of the 10 Rings, named Wenwu, stared at the two tall figures in front of him with a gentle expression, and said in a calm tone, Terra's Star Realm Legion, you are now just being used as spearheads by the old things in S.H.I.E.L.D. to attack their old enemies. Spearhead. If you hadn't manipulated the 4 generals of T-Online to attack my territory, I wouldn't have bothered to come looking for you. Luo Sha, wearing a vibranium helmet, said in a low voice to Wenwu. So, this is just a personal grudge. Young man, if I said I didn't let them attack your base, would you believe it? However, since things have developed to the point where it's either you die or I live, everything is no longer important. As soon as he finished speaking, Wenwu, wearing a simple robe, slowly stepped forward. And with his footsteps forward, the metal rings located between his two thick arms gradually emitted rays of brilliant purple energy outwards. At the same time, one metal ring after another quickly fell off Wenwu's thick arms and began to rotate and fly back and forth around him. Chi-chi-chi-chi. In the next second, before Luo Sha, who was tightly holding the blood scythe in his palm, could drive the vibranium power armor forward to meet the enemy. Doom, standing nearby, moved one of his ceramite steel hands slightly. A large amount of hellfire mixed with a pungent sulfur smell suddenly rose from the ground and quickly burned heavily towards Wenwu's tall figure. Open black lens bracket. Speaking of which, the app that is currently the best for reading aloud and listening to books is Huan Yuan app, install the latest version. Close black lens bracket. However, with the sound of the purple energy-filled metal 10 rings rotating rapidly, the hellfire quickly extinguished and dissipated as if it had encountered a natural enemy, and not even a spark fell on Wenwu's simple robe. Drink. In an instant, Wenwu, his eyes wide with anger, let out a roar that resounded throughout the palace. And with his roar in the offensive stance of suddenly stretching his two thick arms forward, 10 purple light-filled metal rings, like a metal tornado sweeping across the sky, forcibly blasted Doom, who was wearing power armor, far back. Rumble, Chapter 458, destroy you, what does it have to do with you? At this moment, Doom, clad in a dark green cloak, crashed through the thick walls of the palace like a runaway baseball, landing on the ground outside. Driven by the vibranium-powered armor, Rorschach seized the opportunity and stepped forward. The blood scythe clutched in his palm suddenly slashed through the air, forcefully sweeping towards Wenwu's waist. However, facing such a powerful and deadly threat, Wenwu's expression remained firm and unchanged. Thump thump. His feet stomped heavily on the ground. As his foot lifted some dust, several metal rings had already been summoned back into his hands. And with an extremely ingenious defensive posture, he forcibly blocked the sharp edge of the blood scythe. Ding! This was the first time Rorschach had encountered a special object in the native world that could block the blood scythe with its material alone. Before he could forcefully pull back the blocked blood scythe, several other metal rings had already slashed through the air, crashing heavily onto the back of the power pack like meteorites. Rumble, accompanied by a deafening roar that echoed all around. An extremely powerful impact force caused Rorschach's massive metal body to tilt forward quite a bit. He had no choice but to immediately release the blood scythe in his palm. His entire being unleashed Shadow Step, quickly dodging into the surrounding space. Clang! The green light-enshrouded blood scythe was casually tossed by the metal rings in Wenwu's palm. It flew heavily towards the ground in the distance, making a collision sound. HMPH. At this moment, Rorschach, wearing the vibranium helmet, faintly snorted. His two magnetic boots stomped heavily on the ground. His entire being charged towards Wenwu's direction like a metal bull. A metal fist covered in a vibranium shell was also accompanied by the continuous boost of electronic muscle fibers. As it blasted out, it also emitted a fierce whistling sound that constantly vibrated the air. Boom boom boom. Several metal rings that suddenly slashed through the air were forcibly blasted away by Rorschach's vibranium fist, also allowing his entire being to once again successfully approach Wenwu. Wenwu, with a firm expression, quickly moved his nimble steps, constantly retreating, but was relentlessly pursued by Rorschach, whose movements were equally swift. For a time, 10 purple glowing metal rings repeatedly launched continuous attacks on Rorschach's vibranium-powered armor like magical treasures from myths and legends, attempting to block any of his actions. However, apart from the initial sneak attack that had worked, facing Rorschach, who was now prepared for battle, the specific effect of these flying and rotating metal rings was not so obvious. Buzz buzz buzz. Just then, Wenwu, who was constantly retreating, staggered. One of his feet was firmly fixed to the ground by an invisible and powerful telekinetic force. Before the opponent, whose expression had suddenly changed, could forcefully break free, Rorschach, seizing the opportunity to attack, suddenly extended a pair of huge black and red light wings from the back of his power pack. The blessing curse containing bloodthirst and black rage was poured into Wenwu's body all at once. Ah! What is this? In an instant, even Wenwu, who had experienced countless years and seen much of the world, was completely controlled in mind by the sudden bloodthirst and black rage. 10 purple glowing metal rings frantically waved and rotated, recklessly attacking everything around. Ding ding ding. However, Rorschach, driving the vibranium-powered armor, withstood the endless impact from the metal rings and quickly rushed in front of Wenwu. His two vibranium hands stretched forward fiercely, tightly pinching Wenwu's fragile body. Then, Rorschach, gritting his teeth, used all his strength to desperately tear the opponent apart. Ah! At this moment, accompanied by an abrupt and miserable howl, most of the body of Wenwu, the Lord of the Ten Rings, was completely torn into several pieces by the brute force of Rorschach. In an instant, countless streams of hot blood mixed with fragments of internal organs poured onto the metal shimmering vibranium-powered armor. Bang! Rorschach, wearing the metal helmet, slightly shook the blood-smeared visor. He casually threw away the partially damaged human bodies in his palms. His gaze then turned to the 10 metal rings that were slowly floating in midair because they had lost their master. Rorschach hesitated slightly. He still stretched out a palm towards the 10 rings that were floating up and down. Ding ding ding. In an instant, the 10 rings, as if they had found a new master, suddenly attached to Rorschach's two vibranium arms, emitting a series of extremely subtle collision sounds. Thump thump thump. At this moment, Doom, driving the power armor, came to Rorschach's side again. It was he who had used his own magical telekinetic power to buy Rorschach, who was chasing, a short chance for a sure kill. Lord Rorschach, the decapitation plan was successful, but should we think deeply about the words he just said? Doom, clad in a dark green cloak, said to Rorschach in a low voice. Doom, is that important to us? S.H.I.E.L.D. has successfully eliminated their nemesis, and our team has successfully entered the Asian continent. Even if everything Wenwu said is true, it is no longer important now. We have all obtained everything we need. As for Wenwu and his city in the mountains, it's just their bad luck. At this moment, Rorschach, who was repeatedly raising his 2 vibranium arms. Rorschach, carefully examining the appearance of the 10 rings, said without even raising his head. Understood, Lord Rorschach. Doom slightly shook his metal helmet and replied softly. Rorschach, nodding his helmet, lowered his 2 arms. He turned around and drove the vibranium-powered armor towards the outside of the palace. A sentence without any emotional fluctuations also echoed around one last time. Notify David to launch the remaining whirlwind missiles. The city in the mountains will no longer exist from now on. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Accompanied by bursts of whistling sounds that cut through the air. Whirlwind missiles, like a meteor shower, launched a devastating saturation bombardment towards all parts of the city in the mountains. Many black-robed warriors who were still engaged in fierce battles with the ally mech guards stared with despair as countless explosions of fire engulfed their only home. Some warriors, with frenzied expressions, launched a final charge towards the ally mech guard lines. Some warriors, with devout expressions, chose to kneel and pray, praying that the Lord of the 10 Rings, who had already died, would save all living beings from fire and water. However, what responded to the warriors' prayers was another batch of whirlwind missiles that reascended into the sky, as well as the terrifying firelight that gradually covered the entire city in the mountains. In an instant, the wails of a large number of dying people were mixed with continuous explosion sounds. As if successfully playing a mournful elegy to accompany the burial of Wenwu, the Lord of the 10 Rings. Chapter 459, Aftermath and an Uninvited Guest. Happy New Year. Dawn. An armed helicopter carrying Zheng Xian, the director of the S.H.I.E.L.D., quietly arrived at the outskirts of the ruins of the mountain city. The moment he stepped out of the cabin, he immediately noticed the 10 rings on Luo Sha's vibranium arms. Zheng Xian, with a beaming smile, first congratulated Luo Sha and his team on their victory. Then, he subtly inquired whether Luo Sha needed to establish an outpost base at the ruins of the mountain city. Luo Sha rejected the suggestion without hesitation. After all, the Asian continent was still S.H.I.E.L.D.'s territory. Being under constant surveillance would inevitably restrict their actions. Soon after, the Aokage machine guards, having confirmed that no survivors remained in the mountain city, began to clean up the battlefield. They carried the heavily damaged Intelligent Control Legion back into the transport planes. Luo Sha and the others gradually entered the cabin, waiting for the final evacuation. After everyone returned to the East Ying base, an identity verification operation for everyone slowly began. The remnants of the ninja forces and any logistics personnel related to the East Ying base were personally investigated by Iron Man David. Those with suspicious identities were all brainwashed, thoroughly becoming the most loyal personnel. At the same time, approximately 2/3 of the Intelligent Control Legion were left at the East Ying base. This force, besides being able to defend against attacks on the base autonomously, could only be commanded by Mariko and Bucky on a daily basis. In other words, the Intelligent Control Legion's presence here was not only for external defense. If the situation was not right, it would also be a very useful sharp blade internally. In addition, the 4 heavenly generals, thanks to their loyalty after brainwashing and the strong physiques remaining after the extraction of divine power, also became one of the backup plans for dealing with special situations. While Iron Man David was busy reorganizing the East Ying base, Luo Sha also went to the more secluded Zhongxi Academy with Old John to visit the orphan students there. Truth be told, most of the children undergoing Berserker special training looked like iron eggs forged from steel. Even if they didn't look big, they were full of energy. However, Luo Sha was worried that the overly harsh berserker training would completely stop their height and body size from growing. Old John, with wide eyes, quickly patted his chest to guarantee. As long as the Twin Island base had sufficient supplies, they would never let the human berserkers become a bunch of dwarves. Soon after, Luo Sha led the reinforcements who had come to support and left the East Ying base. A series of Thunderhawk transports quickly flew towards the direction of Twin Island. When the transport planes had just landed, and everyone stepped out of the slowly opening cabin doors, Luo Sha and Doom immediately saw several Aokage machine guard squads surrounding them. A lithe figure holding a round shield was engaged in a fierce back-and-forth battle with Natasha and the others. Taskmaster. Frowning slightly, Luo Sha immediately recognized the true identity of this guy from his attire and the identical attack movements as Natasha. Doom, standing aside, unhesitatingly unleashed his magical telekinesis, forcibly binding several figures in the field in place. Then, Natasha, who had temporarily gained freedom, quickly walked up to Luo Sha and reported the current situation to him. It turned out that Natasha and her sister Yelena had successfully brought back several Black Widows who had regained their sanity. And Taskmaster was one of the enemy personnel captured by Natasha during the rescue operation. It was just that because he was very good at escaping and his physique had developed resistance to the effects of anesthetics. This unexpectedly led to the battle that was happening now. So, Luo Sha turned his head and waved his hand at Iron Man David, asking Iron Man David to take Taskmaster for brainwashing. At the same time, he also took the opportunity to meet Natasha's sister Yelena and several Black Widows. Luo Sha first welcomed everyone to join his team, and decided to let them adapt to the living environment in the base before arranging other tasks. After everyone left the location of the shutdown platform together, the place where the Thunderhawk transport planes were parked completely fell into a silent state. Only a team of automated servo robots that occasionally passed by would make slight footsteps. Dong dong dong. However, in the narrow gap of the metal shell of one of the Thunderhawk transport planes, there was a faint, dense knocking sound. Soon after, accompanied by the metal shell falling to the ground with a bang, a red figure with twisted hands and feet suddenly let out a long sigh. Emperor above, it's not easy for me to personally worship you, old man. Tisk, gotta be quicker, don't let Primarch find my trail, or else I'll be coffin-bound and sunk at sea this time. I'm not Dio, I don't like small bread. Deadpool, whose hand and foot joints were rapidly recovering, squeezed out of the narrow gap in the transport plane with all his strength. He wriggled back and forth on the metal floor like a squirming green caterpillar for a distance. After the injuries on his body had completely recovered, Deadpool, acting furtively, quietly sneaked into the depths of the base. However, Deadpool quickly discovered the difficulty of infiltrating the Twin Island base was not comparable to the East Ying base. Teams of Aokage machine guards and automated servo robots patrol operations launched in various channels. And the time difference between the two sides even needed to be calculated in milliseconds. So, Deadpool, racking his brains, chose to enter the ventilation ducts, trying to avoid more patrolled teams. Unfortunately, he didn't manage to crawl forward in the ventilation duct for long. When he ran head-on into a power gauntlet with metal fingers propping up the ground. Cheap cheap cheap, ugly little thing, would you mind moving aside? At this moment, Deadpool forced a seemingly gentle smile on his face. He said to the other party cautiously, "Da da da." In the next second, the silent power gauntlet pounced swiftly towards Deadpool's head like a ferocious beast. "Ah, you're actually a despicable metal facehugger. Where's that damned Ripley? I want to receive the blessing of the alien queen." Deadpool, flustered, instantly became entangled with the power gauntlet. His mouth kept uttering incomprehensible curses and swear words. Kacha. However, accompanied by an extremely crisp sound of bones breaking and the slight sound of a heavy object falling to the ground. Deadpool, whose head was completely shattered, slumped limply in the ventilation duct like a deflated ball. Immediately afterwards, the power gauntlet, with high momentum, actually dragged the corpse that was recovering from its injuries, and continued to climb into the depths of the base. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 460, The Emperor has spoken. Happy New Year. The Gemini Island base has returned to normal once again. Everyone is carrying out their own tasks. The gang members are still undergoing seemingly endless daily training, honing their resilient minds and bodies. The female special agent trainees, due to the arrival of several Black Widows, can finally systematically learn knowledge and skills related to special agents. After resting for a period of time, Luo Sha immediately began preparing to carry out the prayer support mission. Soon after, Luo Sha, wearing the vibranium power armor again, led the Iron Man David, disguised as an Astartes, to the depths of the underground base. Currently, the overall area of the circular plaza is being gradually expanded by a large number of automatic servo robots. The Smart Control Legion stationed here has also obtained the necessary storage locations and heavy cover equipment. In addition to automatic firing turrets mainly equipped with heavy lumber guns. Some areas have even been forcibly installed with Hellfire lascannons to deal with any unexpected situations. Buzz buzz buzz. After confirming that everything was ready, Luo Sha, carrying the 10 rings on his arms and other weapons on the back of his power armor, and Iron Man David completely disappeared from the circular plaza. Approximately a few hours later, Luo Sha, whose vibranium power armor was unscathed, and Iron Man David, who was covered in wounds, returned to the interior of the base. The power of the 10 rings has not weakened, and the vibranium shell can also cope with demonic weapons from chaos. Of course, if the enemy hadn't died so quickly and didn't have time to summon the Qilin Divine Beast, I would have tested the specific effects. Luo Sha, taking off his vibranium helmet, turned his head and said slowly to Iron Man David, "My lord, perhaps in the future we can collect more special items from the native world or special abilities that do not affect your physique to compensate for your individual combat power as a Primarch." Iron Man David, with blue light flickering in his eye sockets, slightly shook his metal head. He suggested to Luo Sha, "The native world may not have so many suitable conditions. It would be a good thing if we could encounter them naturally, but if not, there is no need to deliberately pursue them." Luo Sha slightly shook his head. He gently raised a vibranium palm and obtained a Throne World coin that appeared out of thin air. "David, go find Doom to repair the power armor, and equip more Melta bombs at the same time. How about we take a short rest and continue with the next mission?" "No problem, my lord." Iron Man David drove his battered power armor towards the passage of the circular plaza. Luo Sha also drove his vibranium power armor alone and found a suitable corner to sit down. He slowly closed his eyes and recovered his consumed strength. Approximately 2 hours later, Iron Man David, who had inspected and replaced the ceramite shell, returned to the circular plaza. Luo Sha, whose breathing rhythm was long, quickly opened his eyes. He put on his vibranium helmet again and organized the various weapons on his body. Then, once again, he and Iron Man David began the support mission. However, this time, the place where Luo Sha and Iron Man David went was the death planet Catachan in the Ultima Segmentum. Moreover, the most deadly existence was not those chaos demons that had accidentally poured in due to the appearance of the Great Rift, but those terrifying creatures native to Catachan. Fortunately, the Astartes identities of Luo Sha and Iron Man David were accepted by the locals of Catachan. After they assisted Catachan in ending the invading chaos demons in the jungle, the two successfully stayed in the human settlement and waited for the final opening of the portal. Buzz buzz buzz. With the gradual opening of the space crack, Luo Sha and Iron Man David successfully returned once again. "My lord, I never thought that countless running and jumping trees and those terrifying local creatures would bring an indelible psychological shadow to an Iron Man." At this moment, Iron Man David, still with lingering fear, shook his metal head. He said to Luo Sha beside him, "Hee, now you understand, right? Even chaos demons and tyrannids can't get out of the Catachan jungle, let alone us." Luo Sha, who was looking down at the simulator page, said without raising his head, "The only benefit, in addition to the basic Throne World coins, is that we have established diplomatic relations with that human settlement for the first time. Perhaps we can recruit some Catachans. However, how to deal with the Catachans still requires some extra means. They may not be willing to join us. Luo Sha, who had obtained the Throne World coins, closed the simulator page. He turned his head and said to Iron Man David beside him, "My lord, shall we continue?" At this moment, Iron Man David, who had gradually returned to normal, asked Luo Sha. Hearing Iron Man David's question, Luo Sha hesitated slightly. He shook his head and sighed. "Let's pause for a while. I think I also need to recover from the shadows of the Katachan jungle." So, the two directly entered the disinfection room near the circular plaza. Thoroughly cleaned the plant spores or seeds that may be carried on the power armor. Soon after, Luo Sha, who had taken off the vibranium power armor, returned to the private restroom and lay on the metal bed and entered a state of sleep. Buzz buzz buzz. I don't know how long it has been. Luo Sha, who was still in a sleeping state, was suddenly awakened by the vibration from the simulator. He quickly opened his eyes and opened the simulator page. But found that on the page of the Golden Throne, a prayer support mission that originally belonged to other forces was actually replaced with the Lamenter's chapter. Open black lens bracket 2. A prayer for aid from the Lamenter's chapter Slaughterhouse 3 close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket note. Please note that entering and exiting the Warhammer universe requires the assistance of the Pharos beacon. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket note. Please do a good job in preventing the spread of orc spores. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket note. Whether successful or not, the basic support reward is 1 Throne World coin which can be exchanged for 1 simulation opportunity. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket note. The possibility of recruiting Astartes Lamenter's chapter has increased significantly. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket note. The possibility of successfully attracting orcs continues to rise. Close black lens bracket. Luo Sha, squinting his eyes, slowly got up from the metal bed. He stared at the support prayer belonging to the Lamenter's chapter and couldn't help but mutter to himself. What does this mean? Can't even the Emperor himself stand the tragic state of the Lamenter's chapter? Forget it, it would be a good thing if we could bring back more Astartes. Servo robot. Luo Sha turned his head and shouted loudly outside the private restroom. In the next second, an automatic servo robot wielding a mechanical tentacle quickly rushed into the room. Go notify David, we have another big job. Thank you all for your support.